Matter. We have enough. All right, let's get started. This special meeting and work session of the Board of Education for December 17th, 2024 is called to order. All items being considered this evening are posted on the PPS website under the Board and Meetings tabs. The meeting is being streamed live on PPS TV Services website and on Channel 28, and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the district website for replay times. Good evening and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. First up is we have the consent agenda. Board members, if there's any items you would like to pull for a later meeting or to vote for a later meeting, we'll set that. Please indicate. Ms. Bradshaw, are there any changes to the consent agenda?
No.
All right. Any board members have any issues with the consent agenda? Is there any public comment on the consent agenda?
No.
Do I have a motion and a second to adopt the consent agenda?
Second.
Director Bibb Edwards moves and Director Holland seconds the adoption of the consent agenda. Is there any board discussion on the consent agenda? The board will now vote on the consent agenda. On resolution 72-0 through 72-2, all in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Any abstentions? Director Sullivan, I didn't hear your vote.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. The consent agenda is approved by a vote of 6-0. All right. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just catching up here. Superintendent Armstrong. Next up, we have the annual comprehensive financial report presentation. Would you like to introduce this item?
Absolutely. Good evening. We have here tonight with our Chief Financial Officer, Myung, we have Dan Miley from Talbot, Corvola, and Warwick to provide this annual comprehensive financial report. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Armstrong. If I may just make a brief comment before Mr. Miley gives a brief presentation. I hope this is okay. I know we had substantive discussion with the audit committee last night on the same topic. So Mr. Miley is here prepared to share some of that same content if that's the wish of the board. And maybe I can just repeat some of what I said last night as well. So on behalf of the finance staff and staff in other departments, we are very pleased to be able to share as a prologue to Mr. Miley's presentation that we did accomplish an on-time and clean audit opinion, where we prepared content that resulted in a clean audit opinion, which Mr. Miley will go through. We're really proud of that, and we're thankful for all of the many hours of staff time, especially staff in the accounting department, also the grants team, many folks in the finance division in particular. And we, unlike last year where we did have one finding, we are happy to be back in the pattern of 0 findings with this year's audit, and appreciate the hard work of the TKW team, especially Mr. Miley, for being here on 2 evenings to present his work and his colleagues' work on behalf of TKW. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Miley. Thank you.
Good evening. Since I went into a little bit more detail last night, we'll keep it at a higher level. If you have any questions, there'll be some time at the end. The annual comprehensive financial report is a large document, a lot of great information in there. I encourage people to read it. In addition to the financial statements and notes, which has good information in and of itself, there's also MD&A, management discussion and analysis, which provide some analysis of what changed and what happened within the district at a very high level at the full accrual basis, so what we would normally think of as a business type of accounting. Also included is supplementary information, which includes budget to actual comparisons and some information about pension and other post-employment benefits. And then at the very end is the statistical section, which gives various financial and operational ratios. Of the 100 and some odd pages, only a few pages are actually our work. Most of it is the district staff. It does take a lot of time and energy for them to put it on, and time and energy also to audit all of that. We used two different standards because of a single audit. So uniform guidance requires us to use uniform guidance requires us to use government auditing standards, and then we also use generally accepted auditing standards. Interim field work, so planning, getting our feet wet, that kind of stuff, started in May. Final field work began in October. In addition to the financial statement audit, there was the single audit that I mentioned. That was over approximately $109 million of federal expenditures that the district made during the year. Part of the process is to select major programs. There was 4 major programs selected, which covered 52% of expenditures. The independent auditors report gave a unmodified opinion, clean opinion, so that's the one that you want. That the financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with the US GAAP. In addition to the independent auditors report on the financial statements, there's also a report that we give in accordance with Oregon state regulations, also known as Oregon minimum standards. This includes things as procurement, budget law, those types of things. Additionally, one of the tests that we perform underneath to comply with Oregon minimum standards is over teachers' experience. There was some variances noted, more details in there. As we discussed last night, this is a fairly common finding with school districts. Always strive to do better, try and find the root cause, but it's not uncommon. Additionally, there's the report that we include for over internal controls in accordance with government auditing standards. We noted no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in the internal controls of the districts. And then last but not least is the report on compliance for the federal expenditures. And we issued an unmodified opinion on all 4 of the major programs selected. We also like to make sure that you are aware of certain things. One of those things is that the district implemented a new accounting standard for accounting changes and error corrections. It had no impact this year because there was no errors and no other new standards implemented. Next year, this will come into being with the implementation of the next standard, which we'll discuss in a little bit. Up there is some significant accounting estimates. We encourage the board to keep an eye on these. Anytime that there's an estimate, it allows for management to introduce bias. We're not aware of any bias by management, but it's also just as part of your fiduciary responsibilities, just keep an eye on, does that look reasonable? And those things include things like investments, depreciation, are they depreciating fixed assets, capital assets reasonably, bond premiums, pension, all the fun things. We had no proposed adjusting entries to the financial statements this year. We're aware of no uncorrected misstatements. Other than that, might be trivial. Rounding errors, that type of thing. We're not aware of any consultations with any other accountants. We're not aware of like opinion shopping or anything else like that. GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, has issued 4 standards that will be implemented over the next 2 years. GASB Statement 101 We'll change how the district accounts for compensated absences. This also includes sick leave. They changed the definition from what's paid to what's paid or used going forward. So traditionally, sick leave has not been recorded. Now the district will estimate what they think will be used. So a large number has potential to show up on the district's financial statements and other liability. I also like to take this point in time, like I said last night, reality has not changed. These are not new liabilities. These are not new things. The district has always offered sick leave. It's just how we account for them changed. And then there's some disclosures and about risks that will be implemented next year. And then in fiscal year 26, there's some financial reporting improvements and some disclosure of capital assets coming. We also like to take a moment to emphasize a shared responsibility for independence. There's certain things that we do to make sure that we are independent, but some of this also relies on the district to make sure that you don't inadvertently push us into something that could impair our independence. Last but not least is the management representation letter, which is attached to the letter that went with the financial statement reports. That's a separate document. I do like to thank district staff. It's a lot of work, a lot of questions over and over again until we get the right answer. We could not do it without management, but we work for the board. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
May I just make one other comment? This is related to the timing, and I know there was a good discussion at the audit committee last night. So on behalf of staff, I do want to acknowledge that we produced the final work product that was posted to Board Book. I think it was Friday evening. So that was several days later than we had hoped to get all that wrapped up and viewable by yourselves and the public. So that I know didn't leave very much time between that visibility and last night's audit committee meeting and tonight's meeting. So I do want to apologize for that. There were more loose ends than that just needed to all get reconciled and resolved. And we're happy that we got to the finish line, but it was a little bit after our target date. I wanted to acknowledge that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's also a reminder that all our audits are posted on the PPS website, on the board tab audits. So this is pretty good holiday reading if you're not a little bit lacking, didn't have time to go to the library. So thank you very much for that presentation. Before we have kind of discussion, I'm sorry. I guess let's put this on the table. Do I have a motion and a second to adopt Resolution 7023, acceptance of the annual comprehensive financial report, reports to management, and the report on requirements for federal awards?
So moved. Second.
Director Scott moves, and Director Holland seconds. All right, is there any board discussion?
I wanted to thank the staff for, it looks like a lot of work. I haven't read the entire audit, going to be honest. I'm curious about the single audit subjects, how you came up with the mix of those four things to look at.
So uniform guidance is fairly prescriptive on how we select those. The first test that we use is we set what we call a type A threshold, and that was $3 million. So anything above $3 million that has not been audited in the last 2 years, that has, if it was audited, had some high-risk findings, was designated high risk by the federal government, or if there was substantial change in how the district was operating the program, would kick it into a high-risk type A. So those automatically get selected. Then there's some math that we have to do just to determine how many, what we call type B, so underneath that threshold, but above another threshold, And then we have to evaluate type B programs until we identify that number. So this year it came up to 4. So, and I think 3 were type A, and then we had 1 type B. So 3 of the programs audited were above the 3 million, and then 1 was below the 3 million.
Thank you.
It always feels a little repetitive to say the same thing I said last night, but it is a different audience with 8 different people watching online. So I would just thank the staff. Thank the staff for all their work on closing the books, and thank TKW for the audit. It is always refreshing to have a clean audit without any material weaknesses. One of the things I will, and I think I noted last night, that remaining issue with the data around the teacher experience levels of something we've experienced in the past. Other districts in Oregon experience it. It's kind of an endemic problem. I wish someone at maybe the state level would look at how to make that data a little bit more easily accessible. The other thing I will just note is, our material weaknesses in last year's audit were at least in part driven by some staffing issues and challenges. And so I think it just highlights even more how hard the staff work because we've continued to take reductions, in these areas with budget reductions. And so again, what makes a clean audit without material weaknesses is that you've had staff all year who have been doing their job and putting things in the pots they're supposed to go in and accounting for things the way they're supposed to go, and then the auditor comes in and says you either did it right or you did it wrong. So I'm really glad we did it right. Again, even in this lean environment, it was nice to be able to see that. So thank you.
And then also just to follow up, staff, we make ourselves available to staff throughout the year, so we took calls throughout the year if there was a transaction that staff was not entirely comfortable with or didn't know quite the guidance. Sometimes they rely on us. We do the research. We say, here's what GASB says, and then provide some advice.
Thank you. Any other board discussion?
Sure. Thank you for the presentation and all the work, and congratulations on a clean audit. And I'll just echo Director Scott's comments on the years of experience. We've had that before, and it always, every time that comes up, it's just kind of a quirky thing that gets reported, and to me, doesn't at all detract from the good work that the team has done. I have 2 questions I asked last night that I did tell staff I was going to ask again this evening. And I think I'm going to go with what I think is hopefully the easier question first. And this is a question for Dan Young about or if somebody else can answer it. I'll take whoever wants to answer. About page 18, there's a statement that we had $98 million from the 2017 bond that was primarily investments earnings. And that was a surprise to me because we were $100 million short for the bond, and we actually had to put half of Benson in the 2020 bond. So I'm just curious what those dollars are that existed at the time of the audit, and are they already allocated for something else, and what are they allocated for?
Mr. Young and I might team up on this, kind of have 2 different vantage points to this.
I mean, it's great news. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just curious because we had this whole that's why we hired the bond auditor in 2018 because we were short $100 million, and then
sure. So the just kind of recap, make sure I'm following. So the audit identifies how much is remaining to be spent from the 2017 audit. Those aren't the same as unallocated funds or savings. So those, we can get a full accounting, but the majority of those are allocated to projects. We just haven't completed all the projects, like the health and safety projects, and I think there's some funds in there probably for Benson as well, because that's a split fund. So those are to be expended. They just haven't been expended yet because all the work of the 2017 bond is not yet complete.
Yeah, they were described as investment earnings, so that's not what they are. They're unallocated bond funds, or they're allocated bond funds that are still sitting there. Because in the audit, it says that they're primarily, it's on page 18, they're primarily investment earnings.
I will take a stab at this. So investment earnings come in annually for investments from the bond proceeds that the district has. When those are realized on the bond team, we put those into program contingency. And so that increases the program contingency that can then support projects. So when whatever that program contingency is used for, whether it mean augmenting projects for unanticipated costs, or it could be supporting new scope of work, or it could be a new scope of work within an existing project. So from the bond sort of management standpoint, investment earnings come in as new revenue, but we don't hold them as a separate line. So that line in and of itself doesn't say where those funds are. Again, the remaining to be spent from 2017 is in existing projects. They just haven't been fully expended yet.
So you had 790 million from, which is what was approved. And this is, when it says investment earnings, it's 98 million over and above the 790? Or is that a semantic that I shouldn't, that's not really what it is?
You want me
If I can take a stab, I believe that the investment earnings are associated with bond proceeds at whatever points in time the bonds were issued and sold and deposited in construction funds or whatever sorts of funds. So since the authorization took place in 2017, Dan, help me remember how many series of bonds there were. I think there were maybe 3 different issuances of bonds connected with that authorization, totaling $790 million. So in each case, the bond proceeds are deposited into construction funds, et cetera, and do generate interest while they are awaiting expenditure. So over the course of those 6-7 years, that would be a substantial opportunity to generate investment earnings.
So those
from
are
cash
investment, that's
flows.
over and above the 790?
Correct.
Okay,
Right.
great. And Dan, I'm assuming if we wanted to look at where the 2017 allocations went, it's on the, like BAC, the bond.
Correct. The BAC
Okay.
reports show by bond programs, so 2017, the projects, what's funded, what's been expended, and then what the forecasted to complete is.
Okay. And then my other question, that was supposed to be the easy one, sorry. The other question was, and I'm just going back to the conversations we had last year with the teachers union, and then eventually with the governor and the state about just our revenue and expenses. And in this audit, it says that revenues were up 6.5% or 73 million, and expenses were only up 4.8% or 47 million. So it looks like actually our revenues were ahead of our expenditure, of our expenses. And is that, explain how that is when we also had to cut $30 million last year, and then heading into 40 million. And it's not because I don't believe it, or I'm saying, I just think it begs the question of like, how does this work that we actually have more money coming in than our expenses?
Right. Thank you, Director Brim-Edwards. So and we talked about this somewhat last night, but just to point out a few different factors. I think the most significant factor is that table on page
22 or
22. The table and then the accompanying narrative in that paragraph. And I know not everybody might have these documents pulled up in front of them, so I'll try to reference that as well, so folks can follow along. Both the table and that language refers to, in layperson's terms, all of the district's funds rather than just the general fund. So if you think about special revenues, capital funds, debt service fund, et cetera, then we're talking about the total of the increases in revenues, percentage-wise, total dollars, and the changes in expenditures for all of those funds together. That's what's described in that paragraph. There is, I went back and looked at this after the meeting yesterday. There's another series of descriptions on page 24, which specifies and breaks out the components of those aggregate numbers. So on page 24, there's a paragraph for the general fund that basically summarizes that the ending fund balance in the general fund decreased by 19 million because we spent $19 million more than we took in terms of revenues. And that's really the most direct connection to the conversations that I think you're
Would it be
alluding to.
accurate to describe that while our overall revenues may be exceeding our expenses within our general fund, which is the fund in which we pay for generally staff and other sort of more discretionary items, that's the fund that's more contracting, and that's where the budget cuts are, even though overall there may be outside of the general fund other expenses.
Yes, I think that's a fair description. And in our conversations about the gap that we anticipate at any given year, looking ahead to the next year, and we will be talking about that to an extent later on in this meeting, those are focused on the general fund for the reasons that you just mentioned, Director Brim-Edwards. I will also say there's another helpful table in this ACFR document. It's on page 34, which includes pages 34 and 35, but page 34 has a breakout of figures for the general fund. So on that page, you can see specific revenue, actual revenues in the general fund, line by line, likewise actual expenditures in various categories. And you can see towards the bottom of that page, the net change in fund balance in the general fund was negative $19 million.
Right.
So,
Thank you.
I need to move on.
Yep. So I've just
and I want to make sure the other directors have a chance to
I just want to make one comment. First of all, Myung, I want to appreciate your comment about the timing of receiving it, and I also appreciate last night because I didn't support having a discussion and vote on it tonight with such little time. But I do appreciate that you said that we could engage the auditor and district staff if we have further questions about it. So I appreciate that. I also want to note that I'm really concerned that our local option taxes and construction excise tax, I think for the first time in 2 decades, have year-over-year decline in revenue, which is because of the economic conditions in downtown, and that's going to put further pressure on our budget.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And very good questions. Director Hollins, any questions? Director Sullivan?
No, I don't have any questions. I'm glad tonight I was able to bring up the pages that were being discussed, which made it much clearer for me. I want to thank Myung for going back, looking at it, and clarifying it. And I also really appreciate that Julia is bringing that forward so that everybody knows we can ask questions and look. And I really appreciate that. And that's all. So thank you.
Thank you. Director Green?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
All right, awesome. And Director Brim, I think if we do have more questions, I think this is a really good topic to also kind of plan for future audit committee meetings. I want to thank all of you especially. This is a lot of work, and this is a huge report. And so thank you for being here to answer our questions. we'll now, we also want to note that I was going to put this as part of the audit committee report, but I guess I'm jumping ship a little bit. But the audit committee did refer this out and recommend that the board accept the acceptance of annual comprehensive financial report. All right, so the board will now vote on, wait, I think I jumped myself. The board will, oh wait, sorry, Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment?
No.
All right. The board will now vote on Resolution 7023, acceptance of the annual comprehensive financial report, reports to management, and the report on requirements for federal awards. By voting yes, we are acknowledging that we have heard and received the results of the annual comprehensive financial report. All in favor, ready? Please indicate by saying yes.
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 All opposed, please indicate by saying no. There are no abstentions, correct? All right. The resolution 7023 is approved by a vote of 7-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have the audit committee report. Director Sullivan is the chair of the audit committee, but asked me to sub for yesterday's meeting, so I'll do my best to give a report. Yesterday, we met and reviewed the annual bond performance audit for audit fiscal year 2022-23 with our contracted bond performance auditors from, I don't know how to pronounce this name, Gilberg? Evashek Consulting. As part of, sorry, I'm really sorry if I mispronounced your name, SCC, I'll just say for short, thank you. As part of their audit, they assessed the performance of both the 2017 and 2020 bond programs, focused on the delivery status of the 2017 and 2020 bond projects. They also highlighted some career learning equity protocols, review of the practices. They shared some of their thoughts on the review of practices to deliver the 2020 bond curriculum and information technology work. The interesting parts, they concluded that in the 2017 bond program was on track for completion, which we celebrated with the opening of the Benson High School and the building for the multiple pathways to graduation program, with PPS addressing some schedule costs and scope challenges along the way to meet the intent behind the bond commitments. The 2020 bond for curriculum and technology are progressing as planned and have strong frameworks in place for delivery. They did make 2 recommendations related to the Career Learning Equity Program to help the program meet its stated objectives, or suggested that district revise the scope of work. During the committee meeting, we also received an update from Senior Director Stormy Shanks on the bond performance audit recommendation implementation plan, which probably gave the audit committee a lot of homework from now on, right? Did I miss anything for anyone else who was there who wants to add anything?
I think it was also the CBSE wasn't on track, and to try to bring that up to speed. That was another place that the bond needed work. One of the bonds needed work.
So the only thing I would add is just the suggestion that going forward, and this is a board responsibility, that next spring we get the bond audit and then review it in the spring versus December. We're just relatively late. And also the other place where the audit committee really should be weighing in is on potential topics that we're concerned about with the bond implementation, because that was set by staff last year versus the board having any input, and that's an important place in which we can, if there's areas of concern or areas you want to elevate or get more detail about, that we could have. So that was just the things that I would suggest that we get on the audit committee's agenda this year.
Thank you for that. All right. That concludes the audit committee report. Let's move on to the next topic. Unless there's any questions from anyone up here? No? We're good? All right. Next, we will review the draft for the general obligation bond referral language. Superintendent Armstrong, would you like to start us off on this?
Yes, thank you. So we have appreciated the conversation as we work through our final draft. And so we have our Chief Operating Officer, Dan Young, who will walk you through our proposed option for the evening. So thank you, Dan, for being here.
Good evening again. And that is coming up. So I have a short presentation we'll walk through. And then we'll get to your questions. So that's the run of show tonight, and then take any feedback that you may have. So I really want to just kind of highlight what the updated bond option is, and then answer some questions that have come up in previous meetings. So we'll jump in. I put together my notes in kind of a quick haste, so I might be a little choppier than normal. Not that I'm always that smooth, but if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to stop me and ask if I'm not clear. So materials in your packets tonight, you should have a copy of the draft bond language, the Exhibit A, which is the updated proposed bond option, a staff memo on the design modernization process that was sent out last week, and then a memo about the Native American Success Center. Here are the bond parameters that we were using to develop the bond. These should be pretty familiar. As I noted earlier, we're going to touch on just a couple of specific topics. Here's the current bond program. It closely aligns to what those parameters were. You'll notice that the total is a little over that $1.8 billion target that we were going for by less than 2%. But it's close, and all the other goals it achieves. And so where the blue arrows are, we're just going to highlight a couple of notes. At the last meeting, there were some questions about how we prioritize facility improvement projects. So I want to touch on this. The proposed option includes $190 million for facility improvements. Previous bond materials included a sample of how those funds could be spent over the course of the bond, which we estimate between 8 and 10 years, and just noted the need for flexibility in the use of these funds. And why flexibility is important broadly is just given the large and diverse facility needs of the district and acknowledging that we have a longer term horizon, this 8 to 10 years, and recognizing that our data is not perfect that we have on our facilities, it's essential that we have flexibility in our approach, which allows us to adapt and respond to needs over the course of time and the course of the bond program. This slide, we don't need to re-review this information. Again, it should be fairly familiar, but really what the upshot is there's more work that needs to be done that we're able to address in one bond. I think we've acknowledged that. And due to the needs, we're going to be addressing the highest facility priorities. And what we plan on focusing on as much as we can are improvements that improve the facility condition of the district. So we're probably like, that's fine. Now, how do you actually do that prioritization? So I'll explain the process, and this is definitely an oversimplification. But due to resource restrictions, we can only complete so much work at one time. And when we're planning this type of work out in the future, we typically look out 12 to 18 months. It sort of depends. And the things that we consider is how much work can we complete over that time based upon the resources, both the funding and the staff resources. And then we look at what available facility condition data we have. We have lots of different data points. We have our facility condition assessment. We have work order data. We have what we call project development requests, which are requests from schools or other departments for improvements. And so we look at that data, and some of that data is really great. Like, for example, we'll look at our roofs, and we have, because we've done a lot of roof work over the years, we have site-specific roof analysis. So we're pretty confident able to say which roofs are in the worst condition and which ones need to be addressed first with the available funds. When we look at other scopes of work like site improvements and sidewalks and paving, we don't have that same level of data, so we really rely heavily on what the current condition is and our boots on the ground folks, our custodians, our maintenance team, to tell us where is that worst condition. So if we're planning over the next year to 2 years, where should we prioritize that work? And then we repeat that for all these scopes of work. And they're all important scopes. They all impact schools, they all support learning. And so when we're planning out for that horizon and the amount that we're able to achieve, we try to hit the highest priorities and also a spread of different scope of work. So that is what our general approach is. And it's ongoing and it's iterative. We're doing this on a regular basis, but that is how we approach how we plan this work, and why what this shows is a sample of going through that process over and over the next 8 to 10 years, a sample of how we might spend those funds when it comes to the end of the day and how we're approaching that work. And I'd be remiss if I didn't notice, emergency and unplanned projects, this sample shows about 1/3 of the total budget for that. Just because of the age and condition of our building systems, it's not uncommon to have a failure that impacts or some sort of deterioration that actually impacts school. Those become emergent and high priority. Even if they're on our list to get done, that day that it becomes an emergent item, we look to take care of it that day. So I hope that's somewhat clear. Happy to answer questions.
I have a quick question. So the roofs, we have really good data on the roof condition because those are included in that long-range facility assessment or facility condition. But you said the site work and the sidewalks and some of those other items that don't come up regularly, we just kind of eyeball it. Is there a way when we're out doing work that we can assess the condition of our facilities from the site work and a sidewalk and some of those other, fields?
Mm-hmm. So
we have better data. So we're not just relying on our staff that is walking by one day, happens to be there doing some work, electrical work.
Sure.
I was thinking of like a more systemic way of gathering that data for the future.
Yeah, it's a great question. And let's say we have bad data. We just don't have great data, and sometimes site-specific data. Our facility condition assessment, which we completed about 4 years ago, identified over 15,000 deficiencies. So that's a lot. But that identifies where there's a need. So we've got a lot of information of like, here is a deficiency that you need to address. What it doesn't do is take it to that next step, which would be like the project scoping. Well, what do you actually need to do holistically to address that work? And then we'd move into design and bidding and construction. So it would take, so I guess the point is, we have these initial data points. We need to prioritize based upon that to be able to take it to the next level, because we can't take all 15,000 plus the additional, that great level of detail where we'd be able to prioritize and estimate at such a level that we could plan out for decades. Does that make sense? I feel like that. Okay.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, discussion? Director Ben Roberts? Yeah. Go for it.
Thank you. I'm going to start with page 4, a proposed option. I'm going to note that the athletics, which is later on, has been, even though the number is fairly close, has been fairly, I love it. There's been some cost estimating that has, I think, allows us to more effectively cover more fields, so that we would have, it looks like, swing space for at Jackson for the IW Wells, and also some additional fields at Marshall, which would also be swing space. In addition, I think it's very prudent that $11 million has been set aside for future turf and track replacements. We know they need to be replaced, and so I'm glad to see that. So that's just a comment about that. I want to be, I'm not sure if it's unintentional or, but I think we need to be absolutely clear about what we mean by modernizations, because to date at PPS, modernizations have been a rebuild, like a totally new building, or a significant major remodel. And I brought this up before, but we're continuing to describe the elementary and middle school some as modernizations. And are we going to be replacing any elementary or middle schools? And I don't know who to ask this question to, but it's currently the way that it's phrased. It implies that it's what we're doing for the high schools. And my understanding is we're trying to actually get some cost savings in the high schools so that we can do like improvements, repairs, but they're not modernization. So, but it keeps being labeled a modernization. So I just want to make sure that I understand what it is we're being asked to approve, or what is in that bucket.
Yes, I appreciate the question, and it is our belief that if in fact significant cost savings incur, that we will be able to put those funds towards modernizing an elementary school or middle school as we continue to look at our needs over the next several years. Because it's our belief that that modernizing the high schools isn't where, we stop.
Right, but as it was portrayed earlier, is that Dan has this list of $8 billion of something of like deferred maintenance and improvements, and that's what a fund would be going towards, versus building a new school, new elementary or middle school. But you're saying that's what you mean?
Yes, I think where we have some of the deferred maintenance and priority scope projects is in that 190 million number, and then the other latter part in the bucket, not necessarily called out because we want to know what the cost savings will be, should there be any from the high school remodels. That would go towards continuing our work on redesigning our schools, modernizing our schools.
So I'm just going to speak for myself as a board member, so that's not at all what I thought it was. I thought it was to be added to the $190 million pot of money. I think, I forget, you always use the term of what's the annual deferred maintenance, like $90 million?
Like $1 billion, yes. I will. So go ahead.
I don't think we've ever put a plug number in for like we're going to build a new school without some pretty significant conversation about it. And I guess I would be concerned about all the elementary and middle schools that need sort of basic, they all need to be modernized eventually, but that we wouldn't be putting money into like HVACs and roofs and the mechanical systems, which I think is more this other category. Again, the 190 million. So I want a fair amount more information about that, because I would be hesitant to.
Can I just add something here? I feel like this semantic issue that maybe we're getting a little twisted on. I hear what you're saying, Director Bernard. You view modernization as a rebuild of a school, which it can be. It obviously is for the high schools. I think what the superintendent was saying is it may be a rebuild of a high school or an elementary or middle school. It may also be other modernizations, fixing, a wing that's falling down, right? Those other things.
Which is exactly what I thought it was, but.
My question is, if there's a better word that you'd prefer we use, like what is that word, and maybe we can just move forward with it, because I think it's it's consistent with what we've been talking about the last few meetings, and I don't want the word modernization to somehow become confusing.
Yeah, well, I think it'll be confusing to the general PPS community because since 20.
I don't think it will be, but why don't we not worry about what the community thinks and just what word would you prefer?
Well, I think it's important to what is
Great.
it?
What
is
word should we
Can
use?
you let me? What is it we're asking our community to approve? And modernizations in the 2011, the 2012, the 2017, the 2020 bond meant like a whole new school.
Great. What word should we use?
We should use
like
priority improvements.
Great. I'm fine with that. Priority improvements sounds great.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So we're
changing. So we're changing priority scope to say priority improvements and moving the elementary and middle line up?
No, I would maybe just get modernizations and improvements.
And, yeah, priority improvements.
And priority improvements, got it. Okay.
Thank you. So I'm confused about the two lines. One's Cleveland High School and the other's Cleveland High School Powell Park option, and neither one of them has a dollar amount. And I know that also Hosford was considered, so I'm curious, is the one line Cleveland High School, does that mean just the high school and no additional facilities improvements? And that the one that you get the athletic facilities improvements, since they're not in the other document, is the Powell Park option?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it needs a little historical context. When we were first putting this chart similar together, all the schools had a line where there was a budget number. And when the Cleveland Comprehensive Plan was approved, that was approved for a specific dollar amount, and then there was also the Powell Park option, which we called an option, which had a separate dollar amount. So we were just showing it separate, and they were both funded. The Powell Park option, as we call it, which could use a better name, we'll take suggestions, but really was it was first included as an option because it was a piece of property that wasn't controlled by PPS, which would be required to do more work before we could improve that. And there's also questions about the suitability of the park. So the team is still looking at other potential options, whether if Powell's the best or if there's another site that would ultimately be preferred. The intent to show is that whatever that option is funded under that modernization budget line.
So maybe the better thing is not to be identifying Powell Park, but just like with athletic facilities and scope?
Yes.
Could be Hosford.
It would be clearer.
It would just be helpful because it's confusing to have two lines.
For sure.
And then,
Agreed.
so that's another thing. Also, last meeting we had a board discussion about the Center for Native Student Success, and we have a proposal that's been submitted, and I would ask that the Indian Parent Committee have an opportunity to present their proposal to the board. So that's a request because our forum has never allowed, and it I think they should have an opportunity to bring it forward. We said the community hadn't brought something forward. They brought something forward, and our meetings haven't been structured in which people have had an opportunity to present that. So that would be a request. And then specifically to...
Are you requesting that for today or for a future meeting?
Well, for it to happen. I mean, I don't know what our schedule is before our referral, but I think they should have an opportunity to present it. It keeps not being included in any sort of the materials, and I think...
It is in tonight's materials, though.
Right.
But it's just flat paper. It's
right.
not
and
personal tamony.
I was going to say that should there be some minutes allocated, we do have the interim chair, Tamara Brown, here from the Indian Parent Committee, if she wanted to come forth and present what's in the letter that was submitted. But I don't know if we queued up any presentation or gave anyone any prompt to present anything. So I don't know if she's willing to do that.
I wasn't quite prepared to speak today. Okay. I know communication for the 7th of the actual vote. I know we're trying to rally some more folks here for it, but it's kind of up to you. I wasn't really prepared to speak though.
Yeah.
Could we make an arrangement to give some time on the 7th?
I'm just curious. I mean, it just, not that everybody know how I feel around that anyway, but I guess my question is, if we are going to entertain that, is there a spot in the current proposal when we talk about these dollars that we're going to really shift or look? The reason why I say that is I really don't want to waste people's time if it's not something that we can really physically or financially put into this. And if we are going to look at that, where the trade-off's going to be at from the number that we have here, because it's been overwhelmingly majority is not wanting to go past the 1.8, and we've already gone past it already. So I'm just curious if, in the essence of wasting folks' time or getting people hopes up to really do some, do we really have a majority of the board that are willing to really look at what we're going to take off of this to even make that happen or not make that happen? I think we need to make a decision about that as well, because just having them up here just for the sake of have them up here and really not being intentional, if we are really going to do something as a majority of the board, I think we should have that discussion at some point before we start bringing them up and doing all that as well.
I'll just note that we have had, unlike any of our other past bonds, we've had no community forums to hear from the community, even to present, I mean, even tonight, if we're talking about the language, where there's not an opportunity for not only people to present, but even people to provide public comment. This is the first bond that we've had that doesn't have a bond stakeholder committee that meets in advance, that provides a recommendation. I'm going to go back to this issue was put on the table last spring, and there hasn't been an opportunity, and I've raised it every meeting, and there hasn't been an opportunity, and I just think that's the right thing to
Director Hollins,
to do.
Do you mind if I jump in? There's a couple points I want to make. One, it's completely inaccurate to say that there was no opportunity for community input. We've had multiple meetings with lots of opportunity for public comment. We've gotten lots of public comment from the community about the bond options. So that's been out there. Director Brometter, as I understand, you did put this on the table in the spring. That was the first time I'd heard of it. To my knowledge, you haven't done anything to bring a board resolution to direct staff to work on it. You haven't sort of brought that forward in the committee meetings until recently, and you brought it forward just in that way of say, hey, there's a proposal out there, which we did finally receive. And I want to be really clear, I'm really happy about the proposal we got. I think there's a lot of interesting ideas and a potential for something in the future. What I'm worried about is whether that's even remotely close to something that we would want to or could responsibly include in a bond that we're planning to refer this May. It feels to me like in that document, there are some requests for facilities, which is what a capital bond can be used for. There are lots of requests for improved systems and lots of requests for improved instruction and lots of requests for things that the district absolutely can and should be doing, but that may not be appropriate to be in a capital bond. And I think doing some work is going to take some time, not just to fully flesh out what this even should be, but then to work with the community on making sure that we're doing what, again, is reflective. I appreciate the group that's come forward, but there's a big idea here, and what I would maybe put on the table for the superintendent to chew on and consider is there a process that the school district could engage in that really looks at the issues that are being brought forward by this community and really looks at the struggles that we know our Native students have to figure out what is the best path forward, whether that is building a center, which was sort of proposed here, whether it's doing something at one of our existing schools or programs, when maybe it's even part of one of these modernizations, doing something in that regard, but it doesn't feel ready to me to include in a bond that we're referring in May.
I would just want to respond to that. I've tried to be respectful of the process that we've had, and the process we've had is to bring things to the committee, which I've done, and I brought it last spring, and it's not board members' job to direct staff to do anything.
It's the job board member's job to bring a resolution to the board to get a majority to direct staff.
I'll just say there was. Well, can I?
No. Yeah, I want to stop this because I think you two should argue offline.
I'm sorry, but you let him have a long conversation.
So I just want to reiterate.
You're shutting off the community.
My stance, I think there's a lot of things in the proposal that are very interesting, and I'm very interested in exploring, definitely. I just want to also share that as someone who's taught for 20 years, I've been very lucky to have many Native American students, and this is not unique, just in a lot of our Native American students, but it seems like there's anecdotally a high level of a sense of not feeling like they belong somewhere, and I think that as a teacher, when you hear that just really aches, and it's one of those things where I agree with Director Scott in that we really should look into how to do something well, right? Not just a capital bond may be great, but if we're trying to create a place where people feel like they belong in a center, I think we really need to flesh out what's going to work, and I think that's super important to. And then, also have time to kind of include all our stakeholders in this as well, and really get community input, whether that be building a center in a school or building programming. All that is, I think, on the table. And I think I just want to reiterate, as a board member, one of my priorities is to make sure that our Native American students feel more belonging in the future than they do now.
Last committee meeting, we asked them, the community, to bring something forward. They did, and they brought it forward actually with a lot of community support. And in 2020, we actually just put a line in the bond that we were going to co-create the Center for Black Student Excellence, and it was going to be co-created. There wasn't any really detail at all. And that was what got put in the bond. And so I think there's a different standard being applied to Native students and Native families. And like I say, last meeting, the request was they should bring something forward, and they did. So, and there's not going to be another bond for 10 years. So if we were going to want to have a space, like, this is the opportunity to do it. And it's not just about programming. And I think this is also about, again, are we saying, here's what we think they need, or are we listening to what they are saying that they would like? And I think it's very, very different. And it's confusing to say, like, we don't think they know what they need.
Well, I appreciate your comment, Director Brim-Edwards, and I appreciate Director Scott's direction and suggestion to work with the Native families and community on what it would mean to have a space that is designed with them in mind. I don't think that those things have to be exclusive of one another. I think over the next 8 years, one of the line items, as you all see in there with the elementary and middle, is, I think, as we renamed priority projects, I think one of the things I appreciate in the letter received by Mrs. Brown was sort of an either a new site or redeveloping an existing one. Although it didn't name an elementary or middle school, it absolutely could be. We have a Native Montessori school. We know that there's work happening across the nation on revitalizing the Native language, and I think that with some of the things that they're hoping for, or even all of the things they're hoping for, can exist in a modernized, redesigned elementary school that is grounded in principles for the First People. So I want to say that by engaging in a process and having conversations, we have opportunities, as we will continue to have conversations on priority projects under modernization of some other sites, that could be a win-win for all involved, and not have to wait more than 8 years. That could be in this cycle. I think that's the benefit of the flexible language and knowing that we have a pot of money that we'll use to revitalize, modernize, and prioritize our buildings across the city.
I really appreciate that, Superintendent Armstrong, because...
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm going to jump in. I really appreciate just hearing from everybody, and also want to advocate very strongly for being very intentional about putting the language in our bond as a placeholder, even if we don't have details where the building's going to be, where it's located, how big it's going to be. And we can't, in a bond, address programming necessarily. But if we're honing to our mission, then we need to hone to that mission of creating joyful and inclusive learning spaces. And this very, very much fits in within our mission, and very much within, one of the letters talked about the history of our school district and just our national history with Indian education. And I feel like this board, our values are around leaning into trying to repair or help where we can. And this is a symbol of that help and a promise for the kids of the future. The kids that we are not serving very well and haven't for 173 years. So I'm going to advocate for it too, and being intentional about it. I don't feel comfortable just saying, it'll be in here somewhere, because then, a roof collapses or something else happens and we don't then have that intentionality. So I'd like to see it be very intentionally and spelled out.
The only thing I just want to say is that with our priority projects being under modernization, it wouldn't go towards the facility improvements or some of those emergency things that happen. But if it is the direction of the board to list in, I guess we would need to know dollar amount, and then we would also need to know what would come out of the bond to be able to put that in so that we can process that. But I think the win-win is being able to, have it be with our modernization and priority projects, and we have time to be able to sit with community and really understand what that could be, as opposed to, deciding do we build an exclusive center, or do we modernize an elementary school, and having to make that choice. So just a suggestion.
I really appreciate Superintendent Armstrong, you speaking to this, because you're the first person who's engaged in the discussion. I think that's really helpful, and it sends a message of intentionality. So I appreciate that. I'm with Director DePass. I think we should name it. And speaking of naming it, I actually have some more questions around the actual bond language, and this is.
Can I check in with the rest before we go?
Yeah.
Okay. Director Sullivan, do you have any questions about this bond?
Yes, I have concerns. I know Julia says it came up last spring. I don't remember that. She also, I know at the last board meeting, it came up after we'd talked about the bond for a long time and put numbers down in certain areas. So it seems like if we're putting it in there, we have to take it out of somewhere else. And I don't see a lot of place to do that. I certainly see a way to bring the Native community in for discussion of the best way to find a place for them that doesn't, a special place for them. I know there's a lot of work that's been done to try to make the Native American community feel comfortable in our schools, but it's not obviously exactly where we want it to be. I feel kind of pressured into this myself, that it came just pretty much the last board meeting and now, and then of course a lot of letters have come in, and nobody would ever say they don't want to have a special place for the Native American community, certainly not me. But I just don't think the place for it right now is in this bond. It doesn't mean we can't be working on one in the district, but I just don't see it as in the bond.
Just for what it's worth, Director Sullivan, it came up as part of the all of the capital bond work we did in the Facilities and Operations Committee last spring when we were putting together the larger lists, and we had people comment and provide public comment about it at that time. So it was a committee level, which is why you probably didn't see it.
No, I did not see it. It didn't come to the board, I don't think, the whole board.
Thank you, Director Sullivan. Director Green, did you have any questions, comments, discussion?
The only thing I would add would be echoing some of the things they've said. I don't I believe that if we can figure out the language, and that if we could follow some of the things that Dr. Armstrong has mentioned, that could work in our that could work for us. I would like to see if we're going to a level of intentionality around do we increase? I know we don't want to increase the bond because of, we're concerned about what it could be, but is this a space is this a space where we could increase it by the same 60 million that we did when we did the Center of Black Excellence, and then we put that out there for the community to see? Or are we afraid that if we increase it by 60 million so that we can include a line item, that the whole thing would fail? I know I'm clear on all the conversations that we've had around it being a gamble. I just, from a mindset perspective, believe that our community wants us to do there is a line in the sand, but our community wants us to do what's right for all of our students. And I don't believe the line is at 60 million. And so, and again, I just randomly picked that number because that was the number that we had for the CBE. And so, but again, I don't have an issue with us including some sort of language. I believe that it could go with the modernization stuff that Dr. Armstrong was talking about. But this could be one of those spaces where we say, okay, this is actually so important to us and it's so important to our community that this warrants us increasing our bond ask so that we can make sure that we're intentional about being inclusive of it. So that's all I've got on it.
Thank you, Director Green. Director Hollins?
Yeah, and so I just want to make sure I'm clear with my view on this. I would absolutely love to increase the bond. Everybody, it's not been a secret of mine to increase the bond. I worry, and this is just maybe my own internal barometer, is I worry of us just putting it under the modernization and priority improvements, and for whatever reason, it don't get done. I think, when we look about our communities, and I'm saying ours because, I feel we share some of the same issues, is that, I don't want to just put something out there that's just out there and it doesn't really happen. That's happened to our communities a lot. That happens over and over again. And so if we are going to look at doing something, then I would definitely look at increasing the bond to do that. I really worry about just putting it in, because if we start just putting everything in priority improvements, then I'm gonna want to put some stuff in priority improvements, and somebody else might want to put something in. Then all of a sudden, we just got this big vague list of priority improvement, which we have over $1 billion of priority improvements that we already have to have. So I just really worry about just putting it in there just for sake of putting it in without having any real teeth behind it. So that's my suggestion. But I am definitely in agreement with Dr. Armstrong as far as looking at programming, some of the programming we can do without it being in this bond piece, because I think there is a lot of opportunities to do things around our Native community. So I'll just put that out there.
Thank you. Director Solomon, if you don't mind if I go really quick and then I'll call on you next.
Oh, it's fine.
Just kind of iterate my position on this. As a teacher, as a former teacher, some of these proposals, I can in the proposal that was submitted to us, I can see working. Again, I don't know everything, and I'm going to say that up front. I don't know everything. I have questions about a separate center. I think, from my experience, I have a hard time imagining how that would help. I mean, it may, and I could be wrong, but that's the thing. I think what I would need in order to support a separate center would be if there's information or data from other districts that have done something similar that have worked. I am much more inclined to support something that builds an elementary school program and a middle school program that is specific to targeting, creating belonging and a sense of community among our Native, and just addressing the specific needs of our Native American communities. And so, personally, I think if we're going to adjust the language, I would, at this moment, because we haven't really had much time to kind of delve into the options and the pathways and what has worked and what hasn't worked, I would be supportive of language that kind of reiterates what Dr. Armstrong
Superintendent Armstrong has said. In terms of, well, I really do worry about committing a lot of money to maybe perhaps a center that may turn out to not be the best way forward, and it just took up a lot of time, a lot of staff time, a lot of money and resources that could have been put somewhere else more effectively. And so I am concerned about that. I'm not saying that that is the wrong path. I am saying that I am just concerned about that path. And so that's just where I stand. I would, having a statement that supports our direction and our intent to serve those communities 100%. How it turns out, I am undecided. Director Sullivan.
Okay. So I'm, after looking at the bond accountability report, and one place where we have not done our work well, or at least we are behind, is with the Center for Black Student Excellence. And so I'm just if we had tons of money, of course I'd love to do everything, but we don't. And I think we just need to follow up and get the CBSE going right, see how that works. And as Dr. Wong said, is a single center, the best way to go? Anyway, we don't even have that that information. So I'm just thinking it's too late to add it to the bond. It's unrealistic to think we don't have to take something else out if we add it. And I think we need to stay with what we've been discussing up to this point.
Chair Wong. Yeah, I would agree with what Director Sullivan said. I think what concerns me is everyone keeps talking about maybe adding it, but what the it is not defined, and so it's not defined in the proposal that came forward, and it hasn't been defined by any board members up here. And so I'm just going to remind folks what we include in here. The only thing this can be spent on is a facility. It cannot be spent on programming. It can't be spent on curriculum. It can't be spent on training. I take that back about curriculum. It can't be spent on curriculum, but it can't be spent on programming or training or operations, which it feels like are an incredibly important component of what I read in that proposal, which is, again, comes back to the idea that we, the district, has not done its job defining what it is that will really improve the outcomes for our Native students. And if we're going to spend $40 million of a district, I don't think it's on a community center for Native students. I don't think it's on a building. I think it's a combination. It may involve some space for sure, but I think it involves other things as well. And I'm going to say something that's really going to anger my colleagues, but I'm short timer, and so. But I think it's important. It's important for the community to hear this. The conversation you're hearing up here tonight is performative. It's not substantive, and that's a problem. Because we all want to do something that makes it look like we're doing something. And if we put $40 million in here and we put a line item in here, then we're going to be able to say, hey, look at us, we did something for the Native community. And then sort of like the Center for Black Student Excellence, 5 years from now, we're going to come back and there's going to be an audit that says, you haven't really done much with that money that you set aside for the Native student improvement. You haven't really done much. And so what would be actually non-performative would be if this board did its homework, developed a resolution, worked with the community on a long engaged process, worked with the superintendent or staff to develop a resolution that said, this is what we're going to do over the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months for the Native community. It may involve investing some dollars in facilities, and it may involve a lot of other things that this district could be doing. And I'm going to be stepping off the board, but that's what I would recommend we do. I will not support this going in because it's not ready to go in. It wouldn't be responsible for us to refer it to the voters unready. If it is going to go in, I do think we should reduce the amount, because otherwise, why don't we throw another 100 or 200 or, to your point, Director Hollins, throw another $1 billion in there.
That's what I'm saying.
And I do think, though, it would be really important for this board to do something substantive, not just something that makes us feel good.
I don't even know how to come back from that performative statement. I don't take it personally, though. I just want to say, when we were talking about the Center for Black Excellence in 2020, it was also very undefined. In fact, we didn't know if it was going to be a building or if it was a concept, and we left it very vague intentionally to allow for the deep stakeholder engagement that you'd need to come to a thing. That thing has been, over the last 4 years, defined, and there's been more clarity around it. But we didn't put, we're going to put a red building on Albina and Russell, in a place and define it, because we wanted it to be directed by the community that we're trying to serve, in much the way that we've got a vague kind of an idea proposal. I also have a little bit of issue of requiring an advocate from a community to come in specifically in the box that we make for them and say, well, we can't do programming and we can't do this and that, but we can do something, and it is more than performative, because this community has asked for us to consider including a line item in our bond that puts a center. They haven't defined it. It's going to require a lot more stakeholder engagement, and it's rushed, and I think we could still do it. That's my opinion. That's the last thing I'll say about it, because I know we need.
So I'm gonna kind of respond a little bit. I think when we talk about the Center for Black Excellence, right, it was a pilot, and we're learning, things, best practices, from community engagement to how things could go. Great, right? And I wasn't here for it, when that got presented. But I think if we don't learn from the lessons of that, then we can repeat the same issues that it had. And so while we haven't finished it and got it to a point where we can say, okay, this was a pilot, this is how it worked, I think we'd be doing a disservice for another community to put them in that same boat. And then once again, we're talking about 4 or 5 years later, figuring it out. And I just once again, I just keep worried about if we put it in just to put it in. And when we talk about the priority improvements, we haven't even got the cost of what the high school is going to be yet. And we're still working on that. So it's like we're putting in, hoping that we have enough savings to do the elementary and middle schools and the Center for Native Americans, right? That doesn't have teeth to me. That doesn't have teeth to say we're actually going to do something. And so only way that I would be in agreement with something like that is we actually allocate some money to it, but not just in the hopes that we get savings from here and then it goes from here, then it goes from here, and hopefully we can get it in later on.
Great. I don't know where we end up on that one, so.
Yeah, I guess I was just wondering, so that I can work with staff on next. Is there, since we have, all members here, is there a way to just, are we at majority on this, or what the direction is, so that we can plan forward? Is there a way to kind of sum that up and figure out where folks are at, and then we'll respond accordingly?
I don't think we're at majority at this point. I think there's a commitment from the board that I'm sensing about not being performative and working with our communities, our students especially, and that's probably a voice that I actually would want to hear from most, in terms of exploring potentially a resolution or some kind of effective way forward. And as for the bond at this point, I don't think we have a majority.
I think that would be very disappointing, because we're not going to have another opportunity. And I feel there's a lot of conversation. I don't feel this is performative at all. I think there's a lot of conversation about, we know what's best for the Native community, or we should be, some board members should be putting together a resolution. That is not how we should be proceeding. Like I say, what's frustrating is last meeting was we need to hear from the community what they want, and there was some suggestions about here's what we need to give them, and responded with a proposal, and they actually, I want to acknowledge that they did have like a standalone facility, but they said, hey, there's some other options, which I think is similar to what Dr. Armstrong raised, which is as part of another like rebuild. They talk, I mean, they're currently in, the Indian Ed is in Jefferson, but they talked about also potentially one of the other co-locations. So I don't think it's, yeah, we have to have it. That is one model. I think it would be a big miss, because I think, what would be truly performative is if we came up with a resolution, we talked about programming, and then, oh, we don't have any money for programming, and then nothing happens. And then it's like the next bond is going to be 10 years out. So come back in 10 years. And, I would just say we haven't had an opportunity to hear from the people that we're talking about. And as with Black students and families, Native students and families are the other group in this district that have had, 200 years of not being well served. So that would just be my piece. Can I ask some other questions?
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to add that I don't think there's anything that precludes us from going out for another bond in 4 years. So it's not a 10-year lockout. I do have one question. I know, sorry, but I think we have to move on. We don't have the votes to move that part forward. So I do have a question. It was asked before, and I think you answered it, but I think it would be good to just kind of publicly say it. It's about the admin cost projected increase. And I know that we got a response, and it was a really good one, and I feel like it would be probably best to kind of share that publicly. As you notice in the December 2 option, the admin cost was listed at 41.2 or 41.4 million, and then now it's projected at 83, right? And so I just 41.4. Yeah, 41.4. Did I not say that? It's an old sheet, yeah. And then so now it's projected at 83. I was wondering if you could speak to that and just kind of share the reasons for the projected increase in the admin costs.
Yeah, no, good question, not a problem. And there's a slide that I put up as well that's got some information. So just that line item, the administration costs, that includes expenses. Basically, it's affected needed to manage the bond project. So it includes staff. Staff within the Office of School Modernization, also staff outside the Office of School Modernization that support the bond work. It includes consultants such as our project management construction team members, but also like specialty consultants. We do like a roofing analysis, or we've done mechanical analysis, those detailed analysis that cost money. Our cost estimating, legal services are in that line item as well. Our bond performance auditors contracts is in that line. Our bond issuance costs, so when we sell these bonds, as in the previous topic, when we sell those bonds, those come with fees. Those fees total many millions of dollars. Those are paid out of that administrative line. The district also has an owner-controlled insurance policy for construction projects, which totals many millions of dollars. That is paid out of. So that is what those expenses are for. That's what that line item is for. The administration, like the estimating, is sort of, a lagging effort based upon the bond scope of work. It really depends on what the scope of the size and the scope and what the projects are in the bond to be able to estimate what that administration costs are. What we've done in the past is we carry a percentage when we do early bond planning, because then it's easy as the scope and the cost change. It's easy to just estimate a number without doing a detailed staffing plan that could, for potentially dozens of projects in 10 years or more. And then once the bond scope is really solidified, we do a staffing plan specific to that bond scope of work, and then that's what we propose as the budget. The proposed 2025 bond is unique in that quite a bit of the scope isn't specifically described. For example, this savings for these future elementary school, middle schools, or priority projects, depending on what those are and how much of that goes to that versus the high schools, will impact what is needed for the administrative bond program management. So therefore, there isn't really a way to develop an accurate staffing plan. So what we did to propose, which is also a common way to do it, is just as a percentage. And so we looked back at what we've spent before on administration. The 2020 bond, for example, we budgeted 6%. We anticipate spending about 5.5% when that is all done. What looked at other districts, that's pretty consistent. What we've proposed here is 5% of the total, which totals $83 million. And it's just, we think that's consistent. We think that's achievable. We think that will get us there. If there is a savings in that, we don't spend that much, like we've seen in previous bonds, that goes back to projects. That gets transferred to bond eligible projects. And if for some reason that's not enough, then the bond program continues there to cover that.
So just in summary, a very quick one-sentence summary, you're just expecting 5% of the cost would go into administration, and the number is bigger because this bond is bigger.
The number's bigger, yeah, correct.
Well, yeah, and I would just add it's changed, quote unquote, because we finally, as a board, have said this is what we want to do, and staff have now said, okay, if this is your package, this is going to be our administrative costs. I want to point out 5% is actually a really pretty reasonable, in fact, maybe even low number for a bond, with this many projects. And I'm actually glad that you think you can get into 5%. It would make me a little bit nervous if I were in your job, looking at 5%. I want to remind everyone, because administration often gets a bad name. The bond audit we heard last night and all the things that have happened in the 2012, 2017, 2020 audit, all of those things get done with people who are paid with the administrative dollars. And the things that go right are when those people do their jobs right. And the things that go wrong are usually when we're under-resourced in that area. And so, whether it's keeping track of project costs, keeping things on time and on budget, doing all of that community engagement that we as a board want them to do, all of that is in this 5% line item. 83 million sounds like a lot, but $1.8 billion is a lot. And so a 5% admin rate is actually very, very reasonable. And dare I say, maybe a little bit optimistic. So I'm glad you're going to keep it that low, and I wish you luck in doing so.
Thank you.
I have just a quick question. So just for moving forward from the student center, right, that's not going to be voted on? Is that what we're saying? Again, it's another example of people telling us what we need. It's disappointing.
I think you should come to the next meeting when there actually is public comment time that it sounds like you already have signed up for, to come and speak for your community and let your community speak for itself. I wouldn't walk away, because in this format there hasn't been an opportunity, and I can understand why it was very nice, Superintendent Armstrong, for you to offer that, but I can imagine why you wouldn't want to just impromptu come up and present. But I think you should come next week and speak for your community. Or next week, January 7th.
January 7th, yes.
I would also like to personally connect to hear and talk and try to problem solve. So if you don't mind reaching out to me, I would love to talk. Thank you. Right, last question.
Yeah, well, if we're going to vote on referral, I think we should get all our questions out now. Are we voting on a referral at the next meeting? If we are, we should get our questions out. So this is just confirming, because there was some question about which ed specs we're talking about, because there's been a general discussion of we're going to try and build the most cost-effective high schools as we can using the recommended ed specs. It's the 2017 ed specs we're using, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, not the 2013. So just so we're all on this, again, we're all on the same page of what document we're using. Then the other question I had is, and I don't know if this is a finance question, but if we just now are saying that we had 98 million in interest earnings from 790 million in bonds, in our budget, we have the interest paid, but we don't have any calculation for the interest earned. Does that mean that you're not assuming any interest earned, and that we actually, the net budget, we may have more because there would be interest earned?
Correct. So there's the bonds always get additional revenue, and there's there's different ways to do it.
The premiums.
Two primary that we have historically had is premium from sales and then interest earnings. Those aren't guaranteed. And so the tactic that we have taken is that we don't forecast those. We anticipate them to some extent, but they're not guaranteed, like principal when a bond is passed. So what we do is when there is premium from a sale, that goes into the program contingency. That's what increases the program contingency. So it's available for all bond projects and the contingency is. And then it's the same with the annual interest earned based upon investments.
Yeah. Every bond we've always had some interest earns.
Correct.
And it varies depending on the
Correct.
external environment. Okay, I think that's worth noting. Then I want to talk about the specific ballot title language that has been offered, that's been posted, because this is what we're going out to voters with. And I'm appreciative that staff has been evolving this over the last week. A concern I had that I mentioned when the first language came out is that it didn't name the schools, and the 2017 and the 2020 bond summary language does name them. So I appreciate that they're now Cleveland and Ida B. Wells. So I think those school communities, your projects are listed, your school modernizations are listed in the summary. And not being a lawyer, I'm not going to try and describe what it is, but the caption, the question, and the summary, which are all posted, and there's a red line version that people could look at. I'm wondering if you could, I don't know who it is, between the lawyers, going to explain it. Explain what the question, the summary, and the caption together equal.
The bond title with all three pieces essentially are the contract that this board would be making with the voters about what is to be done. It's not a contract, of course, but that's the simplest analogy I can make.
Right. And so when you hear like people spending money.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I was just saying.
Beyond this, I want to let you hear from the correct lawyer. So give us just a second, and I'll get Liz up here for you to hear from. And I didn't mean to cut you off. I apologize.
No, that's okay.
Hey, Liz.
Yeah. There you go. She did not go far in this bond. So.
Do you want to expound on her answer? Because I want to share, because I know there's been, anxiety, both in the community about like what does it all mean? But I think if you look at the language that's been posted, now the summary says modernized schools, including Cleveland and Ida B. Wells High School, and that is, as you said, sort of our contract with the voters. It's not just like maybe we'll do this, but like this is our intent. And
yes,
go ahead.
It's the legally binding language in those three sections, which are often referred to collectively as the ballot title. But that's the language that will be referred to determine the appropriate spending of these bond funds.
Great. And we've also added in some other specific language. So I think for school communities that are wanting to know like what are the general things that we're going to be investing in, take a look at the summary. And then the second piece of language that appears before voters is the explanatory statement, and explain what legal authority that has or what role it has with like when we're out telling voters like we want you to pass this bond measure and we're going to do this, and here's the language that you use, and it's through this language that's we're going to refer. What role does the explanatory statement have, which is longer and which we haven't yet drafted?
So it's an important piece that needs to be factual and accurate. It's a representation of what the intended uses are. From a legal perspective, and I want to note that the statutes limit how many words can be in each of these sections, which is why the language can be stilted or high level depending on which section you're talking about. The ballot title, those three sections we talked about before, are the first stop of what is the legal commitment the district is making for the use of those bonds. The explanatory statement expands upon that intention expressed in the ballot title. And if there's an ambiguity in the ballot title language, a court would look to, voters would expect us to look to the explanatory statement to resolve that ambiguity.
And so if we were going to do something in addition to that wasn't in the summary, say we decided to like rebuild completely an elementary school, it's not in the summary, would we be able to allow? Would be allowed?
It is in the summary language without using those words. It's to modernize, repair schools, for instance. That high-level language for capital investment defines the authority to spend the bond funds, in addition to the specifics that are also listed.
So it's not exclusive? Is that the?
I would say that the uses for the bonds, when you look at modernize, repair schools, replace technology, curriculum, right? Those are categories of capital expenses that the board is authorizing and committing to. The summary expands upon that even further. It's kind of like nesting dolls of language in the opposite direction, if you will. But those are, if approved, this measure would finance capital costs, including projects that, and it lists those details. Because there's only 175 words allowed, you want to have broad authorizing language that's consistent with the capital investments you want to make, with as much detail as you can squeeze in there, but that's the balancing act with those constrained word requirements.
Great. Since between now and when we refer, we'll have an explanatory statement, right?
Yes,
Yes.
That will come before you on the 7th.
So one thing that I would suggest in the explanatory language is somehow to capture, I think, Dan, you did a pretty good job, but I'm not sure it's within the word limit, on like how we prioritize, just so people have a sense of, we know we have some critical systems that need to be replaced and upgraded and approved. And because we only have 175 words in the summary, somehow conveying that is like, we have, $10 billion, but we're going to, and I think you did a good job sort of summarizing, like, here's how we, with keeping our flexibility, but here's how we apply those resources against the, most urgent needs or the most critical needs. So I hope to see something like that in the explanatory statement, because otherwise it's like, what 10 of the 10 billion are you going to pick, and with what criteria?
Thank you. I want to give Director Sullivan, I saw you had your hand up earlier, and then we'll kind of finish out on that.
Yeah, I did, but we went on past that. I do have a question, though, about some of the wording. If some of the wording on some of the bond stuff, can we just, is it Liz we should talk to if we just want to change some little things?
I'd be happy to connect and try to incorporate. Ultimately, the board will vote on the language, so if you think it needs board discussion, but if we're taking suggestions, I'm happy to take suggestions.
Yeah.
If it's material, you should probably raise it now, just so if there's...
Oh, well, there was one part, I'm having a hard time bringing stuff up and still having my Zoom up here. But it was just the way it was worded. It looked like one of the things we were working on was learning by modernizing. And I think you meant to say learning, health, safety, and learning. But instead you said health. I don't know. It's a very small English thing. So.
But in this document, the words and the punctuation matter. So thank you, Director Sullivan. I appreciate that.
Anyway, I just wanted to know who to talk to about that.
Chair Wong.
Yeah.
I have one quick question. In the summary language, you talk about the measure is not expected to increase tax rates above previous targets. Is the word targets important versus previous levels?
I'll have to confer with bond counsel on that,
Okay.
Director Scott.
Okay, and I'm fine if there's an intentionality around targets. Targets didn't mean as much to me as, like, if I'm a taxpayer and it says it's not going to increase tax rates above previous levels. Just anyway, it's a small thing, but.
Thank you.
And then the other thing I would say in terms of the explanatory statement, I do think, providing some clarity to voters might be important there. I would want to make sure any language we include, though, doesn't bind the district's ability to be flexible as different needs come up over the 8 years. And I think that's the whole goal of having this, is that when we discover new things, or, you can do facility condition assessments every 5 years and they will change. Some buildings will deteriorate faster than others. And so we may have a priority list today that is different than a priority list 5 years from now when we're still using these funds. So I would just want to make sure that we're being clear that we are prioritizing and what that's based on, but not sort of locking us into bad business decisions, in the future. And I think your slide deck tonight actually hit really on that importance of being able to make good governance decisions around what we fix and how we fix it.
Thank you. And yeah, just to rephrase, people have gotten in a lot of trouble forgetting their Oxford commas, so.
I'm all about the Oxford comma.
Yes. Oh, yes, and will be happy to be a leader. All right, I think we're going to move on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan Young, it's very helpful. All right, next up we have the review of the fall measure of the academic progress data. MAP data is otherwise known.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Chair Wong. As we think about the goals that the board has set, it's a perfect opportunity for us to review fall MAP data. And so presenting tonight is our Chief Accountability and Equity Officer, Dr. Renard Adams. Thank you for being here.
Happy to be here. Just give me 1 second to pull up the presentation.
My stuff.
Someone else, Kara says someone else is sharing.
I want that, but I can
There we go. All right. Good evening, directors. Tonight, here to share and discuss our most recent MAP Fall achievement data. Tonight's an opportunity to see where our students are performing at the beginning of the school year. Happy to take any questions at the end of the presentation if you would be so kind. First, we have a couple of just reminder slides. We've shared this information before, but you never know who's new and tuning in, all 8 or 9 of them. We wanted to first begin by providing, again, some background information on the MAP assessment. It's a computer adaptive assessment, and what that means is that, unlike a traditional test that may provide the same test items to all students, the MAP assessment changes items a student sees based on their previous response and whether or not it was correct. The test begins at the student's grade level and then either increases or decreases in item difficulty based on the student responses. This continues until the student gets roughly 50% of items correct. At that point, the test ends and provides a scale score called a RIT score. The RIT scores indicate where students are, quote, ready for instruction at a point in time. And the RIT score is an equal interval score. It's a number, which means we can do math with it. We can add, subtract, multiply, and divide it. So in PPS, we assess students in grades 3 through 8, with the MAP assessment in the fall and in the winter. The data analyses we produce depend on the timing of the assessment. In the fall, which is highlighted here on this slide, each student has a single score for that year, and so we can understand achievement at this or that point in time, and we can compare achievement between 2 points in time, 2 falls. We'll begin, as we have in the past, by examining percentile rank changes between this fall and last fall. This year is shown in teal, last year is shown in red, and the arrows indicate the direction of the change, whether it was an increase, a decrease, or no change in percentile rank. As a reminder, Higher percentile ranks indicate stronger academic performance. In examining percentile rank changes in reading English language arts, we note the differences in performance of our students by race and ethnicity, with Black students performing at or near the 25th percentile and white students performing at or above the 75th percentile. We do see percentile rank increases for Black students and underserved students who are multiracial. Large percentile ranks changes for Native and Pacific Islander students should be interpreted with caution based on the relatively small numbers of students assessed in each group, which means movement either way by a few students may cause a bigger shift than we would otherwise see if we were testing hundreds of students at a grade level. In mathematics, looking at the percentile rank changes, we again observe differential achievement and our predictable gaps by race and ethnicity, with Black students performing below the 25th percentile and white students performing at or below the 75th percentile. Here again, we see some percentile rank gains for Black students and students who are underserved and multiracial. For the next set of analyses, we'll be examining the average RIT score by subject, grade level, and race ethnicity. We'll begin with reading English language arts. And when we look at reading achievement in the aggregate, so this is all students, we see that on average, PPS students are exceeding the expected level of grade level performance for the fall testing window. The dark bars note the grade level, the dark horizontal bars across each bar chart denote the grade level expectations for the fall. This holds true for the following slides as well. For third grade reading, Asian, white, and multiracial students who are not underserved all exceeded the grade level expectation. While Black students did not meet this expectation, they did show a 4-point gain in average RIT score over the last school year. In grade 4, Asian, multiracial students who are not underserved, underserved students who are multiracial, and white students all met or exceeded the grade level expectation for fall. For the grade level, both Black and Latinx students showed an increase of 2 RIT score points over the previous year. In grade 5, we see that both groups of multiracial students, Asian and white students, met the fall performance expectation. Black students made progress toward the expectation and posted a 2-point increase over last school year. So we're seeing some growth, but it is not quite enough, and not enough growth, and we're not where we need to be. Looking at grade 6 reading, Asian, multiracial students who are not underserved, and white students met or exceeded the fall grade level expectation. Here, Black and Latinx students demonstrated a 2-point and 3-point decline respectively. In grade 7, Black student performance held constant, while Latinx students' performance increased by 2 points. Again, here, Asian, multiracial students who are not underserved, and white students met the fall benchmark for student performance. And finally, for reading performance in grade 8, Asian, multiracial students who are not underserved, Native, and white students all exceeded the fall grade level expectation. While not yet meeting the grade level expectation, Black and Latinx students did show a small increase in performance. Next, let's turn our attention to mathematics achievement in grades 3 through 8. As was the case in reading, overall, all students combined, PPS students continue to exceed the fall grade level expectations in grades 3 through 8 in mathematics. As was also the case in reading, and has been the case with many of our data points, when we disaggregate our math map data, we see that our students of color are furthest from meeting the grade level expectations. Here in grade 3, Black students demonstrated a 2-point increase in their average RIT score, although they did not meet the fall grade level expectation, along with Latinx, underserved students who are multiracial, Native students, and Pacific Islander students.
Excuse me. I just
Yes,
want
sir.
to stop for a second because, you know, for the last 4 years, I've heard the same tenor, right? We talk about how black kids are underperforming white kids. We talk about Latino underperforming white kids. I want to change the narrative and figure out a different way to present this information. Because when I'm hearing this information, and I can imagine when our kids hear this type of information, it's this, what's the word? It's demoralizing, yes, because we keep saying this over and over and over. We're not presenting this in a opportunistic way to where it uplifts our kids to want to do better. And so, if you guys don't mind, like I'm sure we all seen the slides, we all seen the charts. So if we can figure out a different way to present this, that would be awesome. I just don't want to keep hearing year after year the same stuff, and we're not, it's not changing.
Understood. I certainly don't take pleasure in sitting here year after year sharing data with you that has not moved. So we can certainly think about the opportunity gap, where there are opportunities for more success, where students have shown some increases. And, what I want to be clear is I don't believe that our results are indicative of the innate brilliance and capability of our students, right? Students enter school brilliant, beautiful, and capable, just as they are, and parents send us their best. And then it's up to us as educators. It was up to me when I was a teacher. It was up to me when I was a school-based leader to make sure we were maximizing and optimizing those opportunities for students when they're in the school building with us, because they are with us typically, depending on a school system or a school level, for 6 hours, 6.5 hours a day. I appreciate.
Can I ask a quick question?
The feedback. Yes, sir.
Because this is such an excellent point, Director Hollins, and I want to be a little more specific because I also want to help staff sort of to meet this. And I'm going to throw an idea out there, but it's complete brainstorming. I mean, are we sort of saying reframing it as again, don't hold me to this, but once again this year our school district has failed our black students, right? And talking about that, and then talking about the opportunities for growth. So once again, our district has failed our black students, and there is an opportunity, whatever it is, 10, 20, 30 point gap that the district can improve on moving forward. Is that the type of thing we're talking about?
I was going to say, at the City of Portland, we're talking about not using the words like underserved, and words that bring communities down and kind of keep them down, and instead using language that's like under-resourced, or where it's putting the burden for the service gap on the institution. So instead of the student, instead of just lumping people of color, it's like global majority. Like brown people are global majority. So it's just turning the way we're naming it. Mm-hmm. And I was going to ask, is that what you're talking about?
Words are so important. Yeah.
Absolutely. When we're talking about, words of, white supremacists, they always use words like this, right? Black people ain't not doing well as white folks. Latinos not doing, and then for me, it's a constant reminder of that systematic oppression that has been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so I'm hoping we can change that dynamic of the words that we use, the words that we choose, like Director DePass was saying, that uplifts our kids, and not keep on holding that oppressive words against them. Because we all know that it's not our kids' fault. It's not our kids' fault why they're not learning. It's a system fault why they're not learning.
I don't disagree. I couldn't agree more. I believe that the burden of student achievement lies solely with the adults in the system.
I also feel, Yeah, I also feel like I hear a call to action in terms of the data, and I know we're working on multiple measures and getting some other things out, but I think I also hear you, Director Holland, saying that you, or maybe the board, and I don't know, I don't want to overspeak, but aren't interested in the standard presentations on the data by grade level by race, but maybe hearing more about what the data has prompted us to do in the system and what it is that we're redesigning, constructing, building, or changing in response to the results that we're seeing, which I know is a different frame of looking at it, and I know conversations that we're having internally as a staff, if that's what you were also suggesting. Okay.
Sorry, everyone else hears that noise, right? Okay. I just want to make sure I wasn't going crazy. Okay.
So the data story, the differential performance doesn't really change across the next couple of grade levels in mathematics, as you all might expect. And so what I would offer that I can do to the best of my ability, given the absence of Christina Howard, our Chief Academic Officer, and Dr. Franco, our Chief of Schools, who both had family engagements, is talk about one of the specific investments that I believe can change these data that we've made this year in this year's current budget, rather than continue through the remainder of the slides. And I appreciate all the feedback on language, because certainly it is never my intention to make anybody feel like they're put down or less than. So I take that to heart, and it'll be different the next time I present data.
I would also like to add something. Now, it may be E flat, and my ears are a little weird today. Wherever that's coming from. If I may add, I'm not an extremist in any way on this, but as a former teacher, I know the importance of MAP scores, and I think it is an important tool. So I'm not trying to discount MAP in any ways. But one of the things also to change the script a little bit is also to remember that standardized tests, including MAP tests, test one aspect of a student. Is it important to measure? Yes, it's important to measure. I'm not doubting about that. But there's other brilliances of a student that a MAP test does not test, right? And I've witnessed that as a teacher, where I have students that I thought were absolutely brilliant, and I watch them do their MAP tests, and it comes out a shock, like, you shouldn't be getting that score. And because the tests like this test a certain aspect of cognition, a certain skill set, and some people work around those, have other skill sets that are important too, to help them achieve it and things like that. So I think, again, I am not trying to discount the importance. I think standardized tests like this are a really important measure. It's an important tool, but also to remember that it measures one aspect, and there's so many brilliances of our students that we are not measuring.
Sure. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Eddie, can I say something?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I certainly think data is important, but I also agree about there's better ways to present it. But this data also, I've been noticing, like 8th grade Native American reading, 3rd grade Native American math, and there's big increases, and I think we want to celebrate too. So there's room for celebration with these scores as well. But yeah, I see what you're saying, Gary. Exactly. So thank you.
Before we go too far, I want to. I know that y'all can't see me. That's intentional. But as disgusting as this data is, and as terrible as this data is, I don't want us to get to the place where, and I don't believe anybody is saying that, but I want to say it out loud so that it's said out loud. I don't want us to get to the place to where we're trying to sugarcoat the data or cover up the data, because until we change the data, it is what it is. And this data should drive every conversation that we have. This data should drive every program that we look at. This data should drive every initiative that we think about doing. within our school system. This data should drive every contract that we write. This data should be the driving factor that drives and determines the direction in which we are going as a school district. Because until all of our kids, and I mean all of our kids, are reading at the levels that they need to be reading at. So they're doing math at the levels that they need to be doing math at across the board, regardless of what one test says. So maybe we do need to look at how we're testing, or maybe we do need to look at how we're assessing, and maybe we do need to have 4 and 5, 6 different assessment points, and whatever the case might be, so that we can truly assess our kids for where they're at and get them ready for where they need to be. But I do not want us to get into a place where we start trying to sugarcoat the data because we don't like the way that it sounds and we don't like the way that it makes us feel. I am very comfortable hearing horrible data if it moves us to the point to where we want to do something and we want to begin to hold people accountable, because we have to hold everybody accountable ourselves, starting at the top, going all the way down to, you know what I'm saying, whomever it is. Everybody needs to be held accountable for getting our kids where they need to be. Everybody plays a role in it. And I don't want us to get to the point to where we're brushing over the data, because I'm concerned about how it might make you feel. I care less about how people feel. I'm more concerned with, can people read? And so, again, I pray that that's not what we're saying. I don't believe it is. I do believe we can come up with other words, because words are powerful. And I believe that we must stay intentional around letting this data drive the conversation, because that's the real story here. This is the there. And so I'm done. Thank you all for allowing me to share.
Thank you, Director Green.
So-
I'm in 100% agreement. Yes, thank you for sharing that. Director Sullivan, your hand is still up, and then Director Hollins after.
That's a mistake. I forgot to put it down.
Director Hollins?
There.
So, Mr. Director Green, I agree with what you're saying, and that's not the intention, is to sugarcoat anything.
I always know you do, my guy. I always know you do.
The onus, though, I just want to make sure that we are being very clear. The onus is not on our kids; it's on our system. And just like, you know, if I'm having my kids at home, I'm not going to sit there and talk about how you're not better than this other kid, right? I'm going to be looking like, well, why are the schools not offering you tutoring? Or why are they not sending you homework? Like, these are the conversations that I had with my kids, you know, and so I just want to make sure that we're doing that as a district-wide of looking at, well, how can we do better as a system and not put the onus on, you know, this kid better than that kid.
Thank you, Director.
And I agree with that 100%.
Could I ask a data question? Do we have maybe I missed it, but do we have the percentage of students who took the test?
The participation rates and counts are at the end of the presentation in the appendices.
Okay, that's what I thought. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go ahead. But with that, I do have some questions. So when we talked about the system and what's happening, I guess one of my questions is this: MAP testing is done almost every 8 weeks or so.
We have a typically a 5 to 6 week window in the fall, and then we have a 5 to 6 week window in the winter. Some schools, based on principal building leader conversation with teachers, have also decided to test again in the spring, but we do not require that from the system level.
Okay. So, and in line with that, so one of my questions would be, what specific adjustments are being made to the curriculum or instructional practices based on the MAP findings within that time period?
So what I can share, I appreciate the question, Director Hollins. What I can share is this year we made an investment in our elementary and middle schools in a position we call an academic interventionist. It's a teacher level position. We analyzed schools' MAP data to look at the proportion and percentages of students who, based on those data, were not quite where we need and know they can be. And we then allocated positions to those schools based on the number of students, with the express purpose or intention that the academic interventionists would be working with these particular groups of students to help accelerate their performance in concert with them being in their classroom with their classroom teacher, who should be providing them with grade level and standards aligned instruction. Now, that's new for this year. In terms of the academic interventionist, that position being allocated from the district was a new investment going into this budget cycle. And so,
excuse me, but didn't we have some kind of position like that last year where they had kids that who need additional help, went into a certain class? I can't remember what it's all. I think it was called some interventionist.
Some schools had hired interventionists, but we did not make a systemic investment in the position. So that's an important clarification. I appreciate that. And so that is one of
Adams, can I ask you just a question? I thought we used our part of the equity funds and because it went from 8 to 4%, and I thought we used that money to fund the intervention specialists.
Right. Yes.
But you're saying we didn't. I'm sorry.
No.
Okay, I'm sorry. I misunderstood that. Then what you said.
No, it's definitely a system-wide allocation that we made by redirecting some existing funds.
So they haven't.
I'm sorry?
So we have academic intervention.
Yes.
Okay.
New for this year is, instead of Principal Scott using some of his or her or their funds to fund independently an interventionist, we've said, hey, look, you've got 30 students in your school who appear to be not performing where we know they can and should be performing. And so we're going to allocate a 1.0 interventionist to your school to specifically support those students in their reading and mathematics work. And that's been the investment. To your question, Director Hollins, I am, in talking to Chief Academic Officer Howard and Dr. Franco, one of the things we've been talking about is, if we believe that having high quality materials and highly trained and highly qualified staff matter, we want teachers using the assessment that's closest to the student and the learning experience, which would be the curriculum embedded assessments. If in a scenario where teachers and educators are making adjustments to their instruction based on the units they just taught, the curriculum-based assessments that they just provided to students and how students performed, if they're making adjustments to that, over time, student achievement should increase and students should be growing academically.
So you're talking about with the map data. So if I'm a teacher, and maybe some of the teachers on here can explain too, how am I receiving that information and what specifically is being done if I see a kid has an issue with geometry and math versus they might be stronger in algebra? What specifically am the teachers doing to focus in on that kid within that time period for the next testing?
Sure, there are standard areas within math and geometry. Algebraic thinking is one of those. And I know that we have intervention and resource materials that are designed to be used with students that are showing those types of skill gaps.
So when we talked about, and I heard it appear, we talked about other forms of assessments. I know I was listening to I can't remember the state education person on a podcast today, and he talked about formative, interim, and I think summary assessments. How does that differ from the MAP assessment?
I would call the MAP assessment an interim assessment in terms of so you have the daily checks that teachers do, an exit ticket, a drill is what we used to call them when I was in school. Then you have end-of-unit curriculum-based assessments. And then you have an interim assessment, and those happen depending on the length of the unit, right? It could be 2 weeks, it could be a month. But then you have an assessment that sort of just happened, and you can look back over the last 3 or 4 or 2 weeks to determine what adjustments you need to make. Then you have an assessment like MAP that in the fall tells you where students are performing, but doesn't necessarily tell you what to do next. Again, as a teacher, I would look back at my curriculum-related resources to help me, because that's what I'm using every day to teach the student. And those materials also have what we call Tier 2 supports in them so that we can work with students who are not where we know that they can and should be. And then at the far end, you'd have a summative assessment like OSAS, which by the time we get those results, there's not anything we can do. The students are in the next grade. We can think about what we can do better for this year's fourth graders than we did for last year's fourth graders. But the opportunity to use those data to drive intervention on students is not very high.
So just to make sure I understand, so if we were using the MAP data and we're talking about, that time period between the different tests, you saying there's interim tests being done in between those 5 to 6 months as well?
Mm-hmm. There should be curriculum-embedded assessments that are happening at the end of each instructional unit.
And how the teacher using those. I guess my thinking is if I'm using this MAP data at the beginning, I'm getting this MAP data at the beginning, so I'm knowing where a kid is at, I'm supposed to adjust the curriculum or adjust how I teach that kid, and you're doing that at least minimum 2 times a year. By the time the OSAS data comes out, there should be improvement, right? Because the MAP points is supposed to be related to performance.
Mm-hmm.
And since we haven't really been seeing that in our OSAS data, how are we transitioning? Because this is the same, like I said, we've been going through this for the last 4 years, at least since I've been on. What are we missing? What is not connecting?
I think one of the things that we often see in education is what I often wonder is, do we all believe that all students are capable and brilliant and able to achieve? Do I believe that as their teacher, I'm able to take them as far as they could go? And I think we think of that as like self-efficacy among staff and buildings, having a culture of high expectations, believing that when you set a bar with support, students can reach that level of rigor. And all of those things have to be in place. I mean, I've shared with our principals some of my own personal story where I was not being educated in elementary school. I was zipping through my work. I was bored. I got bullied. I got in trouble. I got suspended. And they were going to put me in special education until my great-grandmother who raised me was like, no, you're going to assess him, and then we're going to figure out what he needs instructionally. And then I went to a different school where they had a higher level of rigorous standard. And what we're trying to do here in PPS, through our curricular resources that all teachers have, through our professional learning that we provide to teachers, is make sure and try to ensure that there's not different levels of rigor going on across all the different classrooms. Are we there yet? I would say no, we're not. We're not there where we can ensure that that rigor is happening. Are we inspecting that? We are. We're doing collaborative instructional walks where we're monitoring the implementation of curriculum and the instructional program to try to see where schools and staffs might need some additional supports.
And will we be there? Absolutely.
I'm hopeful that we get there. I guess my question is if MAPS, and this is only because it's been the last 4 years that we've been using the MAP stuff and we haven't really seen a big change. Should we at least start looking at or thinking about different type of assessments that can help us get there? Because when we talk about, everybody knows the biases in the history of standardized tests, is there other assessment tools that we can start looking at versus just doing the same one and we're still getting the same results?
I would, my reaction to that would be, as I look at our data, I see similar patterns irrespective of what I look at. When I look at our post-secondary readiness data, for example, we'll be bringing that in, that'll be finalized in late January. We'll be able to bring that to you most likely in February. We see across a lot of different measures of post-secondary readiness, similar patterns, right? And so what that suggests to me is that it's not the measure that's the problem. I'm not saying that, and I don't sit here before you to say that standardized assessments are the be-all, end-all. I know they have inherent problems, and yet we have Black, Brown, and Native students who pass them all the time with appropriate, rigorous instruction.
So what I'm hearing, just want to make sure I understand. So what I'm hearing is that we need to focus on the rigorous instruction, not so much as the map data, because if we have the rigorous instruction, inevitably the data should go up.
That is my wholehearted belief.
So, question, I know that is this working? There's a lot of national data that's showing that during the school year, the students are improving, who may be a little bit, have not reached their potential, right? Are still keeping up the same rate as those maybe who are or scoring higher on these tests, and where we see the drops and the dips happen during like summer break. Is that something that we're also seeing in our district as well?
Well, I think we've benefited from, in most of the previous years I've been here, some funding to help provide summer programming for students who were most at risk for what they call summer learning loss or summer melt. So it is not my understanding that we've seen it to the extent that you may see it in places where they don't have those summer opportunities for students. And certainly, we need to be, I would ask us to be mindful that students who are not quite where they should and could be can grow and still not grow enough to meet fourth grade standards in math, right? Because that growth over time has to accelerate. And so that's often another part of what we see is that students are growing and they haven't yet made enough growth to be at that grade level standard.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So, and going in line with what you're saying, right? So if you're saying they're growing, but they're not necessarily meeting the academic standard, right? But they're growing, and we're talking about the interventionalists, right? So my question is, if the interventionalist is looking at the MAPS data, right? What is he actually doing to help that kid get better? Because if he gets it in, I'm thinking fall, say September, and he sees that he's off, well, you have 5 or 6 months to help move that. What are they actually doing to help that child?
So I'm going to tell on myself here and say I don't quite know enough in depth about the curriculum to tell you exactly what they might be doing. If I know if Ms. Howard was here, she could speak to the components of the curriculum that are designed to support students who are not quite where we need them to be and should be. Oh, hey, Jay.
Director Collins, maybe, I don't know if you know, but one of my previous jobs is actually teaching teachers. Mm-hmm. I'd be happy to, if we can find a teacher volunteer, to have go with you as a guided, guided observation where I can kind of show how things, point out how things work and things like that to kind of help understand some of the practices that we're having, some of the struggles that we're having as a district as well.
Oh, no, absolutely. And last year, actually, I did go on a couple of those walks. And that's why I'm asking the question, because when I seen that one of the interventionist classroom, they had 5 kids, and to be honest, they wasn't really doing much. And so you had one person, I don't know if it was a teacher or whoever it was, but it was an interventionist, and you had 5 kids. And I couldn't go in and tell, oh, they're working on this or they're working on this. So when I went in for the walks, they gave a sheet that show what to look for, right? And so when I went into this class, I didn't see those look for. So that's why I'm like, I hear what you're saying, and I think that would be great, but it just seemed like something's not connecting with that model, I'm going to say, and even the debrief that we did with those models, it didn't really seem comprehensive enough, at least for me, after we debriefed with the other principals and all that stuff. And so when we talk about rigorous instruction and teaching teachers right, we have to make sure that we have to be able to make sure that they're doing or have matrix to know that they're doing it the right way at the same time. And now it only did 2 walks. I didn't do walks all around the city, but I did two walks, and they were both like the same level type of stuff.
Yeah, well, good evening. I came down to, because actually the interventionists are in my department, so I came down to answer your question related to some of the activities you're doing, and actually I could offer both to answer the question and take you to some of the reading groups specifically that they're doing, and I could prepare a response for you too that's a little more in depth. But briefly, what the interventionists do is they do take the MAP data, they also take OSAS data, and they look at where the students are performing, but then outside of just informing where they're performing, they then have to do a diagnostic assessment to see where their needs are specifically in reading. And then they have some specific reading intervention programs that they use that they run small groups with to teach to address the gaps in reading for the students. So the students are getting the core reading instruction and then very specific small group instruction during the intervention time to address whatever the gaps are for them. And they group the kids similarly, I can't say that word, but commonly based upon their needs.
And and so from that, are we seeing improvements at the end of the year when we talk about the OSAS data? Because the data that I see, I don't really see improvement.
So we are seeing positive growth based upon the individual students' goals based in their intervention plans. So we haven't gotten to the point yet where because we're just started it very intentionally this school year.
District-wide, okay.
So we haven't gotten to the point where they're taking OSAS data. I'll share I can share that when I prepare the response for you. I can share the data with you that we're seeing also, and it's showing significant impact for many of the students. And at that, the growth may be significant, and we may not see it entirely in OSAS, but we are seeing significant growth for the students.
And I would love to see that whole plan from start to finish, from how they use the MAPS data, and how they set up their plans. I think that would be helpful as well.
Happy to put.
Yes.
Oh.
For the kind of sake of time, I really do appreciate your line of questioning. And just kind of reiterate what Director Green said, this should be the center of our focus, right? So I am happy to extend this conversation and continue it. Would it be okay to, if you have questions, maybe we could submit it and then we can, compile answers and then schedule a future meeting to continue discussing it? Because this is, again, like Director Green said, this should be the center of what our focus is on all the time.
Yeah, it's up to you.
All right.
I can definitely put together a series of questions around how the different assessments that we're using, how we're measuring those assessments, when we're coming back to reassess, and how we're establishing pivot points. So I do have a series of questions that I would like to put together and get responses to, and maybe that can be part of another work session that we do simply around the data, the metrics, and how we're going to measure moving forward. Because I know that, and I'm putting this out there because I know she just hasn't had a chance to spend as much time talking as we have. But I know Dr. Armstrong has a very intense plan to increase our literacy rates for our Black and Brown students. And so I have no doubt that this is about to shift, and that this will be the last year that we hear this type of damaging, demoralizing data. So I just want to look at how we're going to be measuring and what we can look for and what the signs will be. So yes, I would definitely put together a series of questions.
It sounds like, if I may, that the board might have interest in a presentation on balanced assessment and instructional programming. And I could certainly work with Jay and Ms. Howard to bring forth a presentation about that, to bring those pieces together.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And Director Green, if you don't mind sending in your questions, maybe you could email it to Ms. Powell, and then we'll start collecting and try to. But yeah, I think you have really good questions. And
yeah, no problem. Would you prefer that they just go to Ms. Powell and not the whole board? I was just thinking I would put my questions out there for the whole board to see, just so that other board members may seem like, oh, that's a question that I had, so I don't. And then we can just compile one big document. But if you want me to just send my questions one way, I can do that as well.
You can do both. The only issue is that, make sure that as board members don't respond and have a serial discussion, right? So you can send
understood.
It,
fair enough. Fair enough.
Then,
Understood.
Ms. Powell will collect it, and then we'll compile it. I think that's a great idea. Thank you, Director Green. And Director Solomon, I saw you had your hand up earlier, and then we'll finish on that.
I had it up earlier, kind of in response to Gary, although I think this plan you have right now is great. We had an invitation a while ago to go to a fourth grade classroom. That was last year. And I went and helped her out for about a month, just an hour, just to see what it was really like. And this was at an invitation. You certainly don't want to just drop in on somebody's classroom. But that's the best way for you to see what's really going on and to understand what the teachers are doing. And they're probably not doing it perfectly, but just what they have to do to try to meet the needs of a fourth grade student who's not reading and one that's probably reading at seventh grade level. I mean, it's just overwhelming. So to find out, what's being done to help.
Me and you'll have to talk.
It's wonderful. So I like what we're doing, and I like putting the focus on the kids and what we're doing and how we're going to make a change, and have that be the highlights of what we as a board are working on. So thank you, everybody who's made an effort to kind of change what we're doing, change it up a bit. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Director Solomon. Man, you're gonna have to talk. I don't have for a whole month to go sit in the classroom. I would love to, but I hear what you're saying. No, I hear what you're saying. You're on mute. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't go all day. I went 1 hour a week. So
I got you.
That's all you need to see what's going on. Believe
All
me.
right. All right.
Probably wouldn't want to stay longer than that.
All right, so yeah, we can definitely come back to this, in January, as far as to have that presentation and these topics. I have like 4 pages of questions, only asked 3, so that would be great. Is that something we can do?
Yeah.
All right.
I would love that. Thank you, Director Sullivan. Thank you, Director Hollins. I agree with you completely. Thank you, Jay Buno and Renard Adams. Very helpful and always appreciate your time. With that, let's move on to the next topic. The last topic for today, last thing on the agenda item is the budget work session to establish priorities. This is the opportunity where we begin discussing the 2025-26 budget. The goal of tonight is to review the budget principles and policies and discuss our priorities. Dr. Armstrong, Superintendent Armstrong, would you like to introduce the staff?
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Before I introduce the team, I have a quick quote. So in 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King wrote a book titled Strength to Love. And there was a quote that appeared in it. It said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. And I think of our interim CFO, who, by the way, is before you in person for the very last time. And I think about his decision to stay after our previous superintendent left, his decision to stay after our interim superintendent left, and his desire to stay to support the new superintendent until a new CFO was named is incredibly inspiring. I'm incredibly thankful, and I just wanted to publicly say that your leadership and your dedication and your ability to stay put is impactful, and I just want to say thank you. Multiple times over, thank you. So with that, I am introducing our interim superintendent, Myung Lee, and our chief of staff, Deborah Kafori, to introduce our budget development or start the conversation. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Armstrong. I didn't expect that, but I very much appreciate it, and it's been a wonderful experience to be part of the PPS team and the PPS family for a little longer than I expected. I have a quote too. Since we're doing quotes, I have a quote from Brokeback Mountain. I just can't quit you, but I will slowly fade away.
Well, to be clear though, this is the last meeting that we'll see him in person, but I suspect he'll drop in to pitch hit on Zoom every once in a while. But yeah,
and we're really. Everyone in the finance team, and if I may speak for staff in cabinet and elsewhere, we're really excited about Michelle Morrison coming on board in a few short weeks, and her arrival has made me feel so much better about having an awesome person to pass this interim baton to. So I know we're all looking forward to her being in these seats in future meetings about budget. So. Again, thank you, Dr. Armstrong, very much for that. So, directors, we, as is often the case in budget conversations, we're talking about multiple fiscal years in the course of one evening. So, at the beginning of the meeting, we talked about last year, and now we're transitioning to a conversation about next year. So, this is the first in a series of what we think will be 4 board discussions over the next few months, and this is all aligned with the budget calendar, which you approved back in October. So this is getting started, and we know it's been a long meeting, so we're going to go fairly briskly, I think, but then look forward to continuing these budget discussions, and I will stay tuned in even if I'm not physically visible in the gallery here. So
you're going to be watching from home? I'm
going to be watching from home, or maybe Mexico or somewhere else. So the first part of this update tonight, we did want to sort of ground this discussion, including for future discussions, on some high-level updates about our forecast, including our projected gap for next year. And I know board members have seen this type of summary in the past several weeks as well, but just to recap for yourselves and for the community, we did have, when the board adopted the budget for the current year, 24-25, we had a premonition or an expectation that the year that we're talking about now, 25-26, there was still a significant gap yet to close. So we were talking about a $70 million gap being addressed in 2 fiscal years. And spoiler alert, that is still kind of where we're looking at the moment, although there have been some plot twists over the past few months. So let me just summarize those. When the announcement came out over the summer about these technical adjustments to the current service level methodology, that was sort of late June or early July timeframe, the governor announced through the work of a committed working group to really look at the CSL formulas and the assumptions behind determining what the true costs of the current service level were. Just not enhancing, but sort of maintaining the current levels of investments and updating them for increased costs for salaries and the like. That was estimated to be about $515 million, which was still well short of the quality education model, QEM, but meaningful improvement from the prior methodology. So that was in its way encouraging in terms of improvements from the forecast that we had been using for the adopted budget. A few months later, in October, the PERS board, so the agency that runs the state pension system, approved rate increases that were very significant in terms of increased costs for most employers in the system, and significantly abrupt cost increases for many employers, including PPS. So in a way, although the numbers aren't quite, they're in a way sort of independent, but the net effect is that the better news from the CSL improvements was actually more than offset to the bad by these increases in PERS pension costs that were revealed a few months later. 2 weeks ago, the governor proposed her budget through a written document for the next biennium, for the 25 to 27 biennium, which reflected the full $515 million worth of the CSL adjustments. So that was good to see, affirmed in the budget proposal by the governor, and an additional $85 million related to increased PERS costs. $85 million is better than nothing, better than zero, but it really is a fraction of the costs of those increased PERS rates that are in that third bullet point. So long story short, we are still back to looking. We've kind of come around the barn a little bit, but we're still now looking at a gap of about $40 million for next year, for 25-26. I should note, though, that part of the arithmetic that's not really stated there is that because of the magnitude of the PERS increases, in our estimation that the gap is about $40 million still, there's to a degree a bit of a reliance in our planning assumptions on tapping into this one-time PERS reserve that the district has. It's Fund 225. It's a fund that was established about 13 years ago, if I recall, and there was a board resolution that was established to help smooth out the annual fluctuations in PERS costs, and that fund has about $23 million in it now. So in light of the sharpness and the magnitude of the increases in PERS costs, in our staff conversations among each other and then with the superintendent, we've started to talk about drawing some of those funds, not all of those funds, but because of the necessity and the sharp increases in those PERS costs, we're starting to discuss what a recommendation might look like. The board will have to approve that, of course. So that's just sort of a preview for now.
Young, just so we don't lose that point later, because I know you're going to go through a lot of other material. It sounds like that's exactly what the fund was set aside for, was to smooth sharp increases, which is what we have, and so I think it makes total sense. You know this, I'm just more saying it for the public, it is also one-time dollars, and so any dollars we use are simply delaying the cuts, which may be useful to delay for a year or two so we can smooth things out, but they're delaying it. I would say, to the extent you have $20 to $30 million, it seems like, one strategy might be pulling $5 million out a year for the next 4 years, which begins to turn it into, ongoing. It's not quite, but you can at that point sort of say, hey, we can avoid, maybe $4 or $5 million of ongoing cuts by stretching this out and not using it right away. So all those strategies you're very familiar with. I'm just more saying it. You
Right.
know,
Thanks,
get it on the
Director
table,
Scott.
since
Yes.
I don't have any more opportunities.
Right, thank you. No, the question of the pace of utilizing those one-time resources is a key question to consider, and that example certainly applies. So to spend it a little more slowly, or if there's a reasonable confidence that the uptick that we're seeing in the PERS rates might be more of a 25 to 27 biennium effect, then that could also help yourselves and us feel a little bit more confident about maybe spending it a little more quickly, and for example, focusing on the upcoming biennium.
Could I just ask one really quick, since Director Scott already interrupted you, I figure I'd jump on too. I just want one clarifying question. This 40 million budget gap for the next year is assuming that the legislature is going to adopt the governor's CSL. So worst case scenario, if they don't adopt it, what may we be looking at?
60 million.
It's
See, and,
That's what I thought.
and also it includes a spin of the PERS reserve of 10 million. So without the CSL, without the 10 million, our actual reduction is 73 million. So just to be clear on that.
Thank you.
A little later in this presentation, we're gonna draw a connection back to the boards and the district's advocacy agenda. Chief Kafori is gonna sort of re-summarize. We know you're very familiar with that, but there is a interplay between these assumptions and what may happen, and we hope that it gets better and not worse, but between these assumptions and what ends up being enacted in the final enacted budget, state budget. Okay, so the next section of the presentation and the conversation is really to high level kind of grounding this conversation and this process in principles and policies and priorities. So to take them in order, this is a summary of a document that is linked, accessible through the link that's on the slide there. I don't know if hopefully folks can access that through Board Book. But there was a resolution passed in 2016 by the board which established budget principles, and I'll just say it's not written on the slide, but this was also connected to work by the CBRC, the Community Budget Review Committee, that presented a draft of these principles. There's a lot more language in the resolution than what's summarized on the right-hand side of this slide, and worth reviewing when you get a chance, and or re-reviewing, I should say. And the board approved the principles in the resolution in February or so of 2016. So I just wanted to remind the community of that document that the board approved, and these are just a few of the highlights in that set of budget principles. The next slide restates and similarly has a link to the full board policy about reserves, and we know you're all very familiar with this policy because we talked about it a lot pretty intensely last year, and including in the budget development process for the current year. So, but just to restate that the board has a policy to maintain a reserve, a general fund reserve, between 5 and 10% of annual general fund revenues, and as you know, directors, we've been focused more on the lower end of that range, the 5% range, for a little over a year, and that continues for now, unless there's direction to pivot to a different target that's higher than the 5%. that continues to be what we're organizing our work and our recommendations to the superintendent and ultimately to the board around trying what are the decisions, what package of decisions can be made in light of these fiscal headwinds that will allow the budget to maintain that 5% reserve level and not dip below that because it is a board policy. With that, I'm going to pass the mic back to Dr. Armstrong to engage in a little conversation amongst yourselves.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, staff. Thank you, team. So budget priorities discussion, I also understand that our time has gotten away from us, but I still think it's important to lean into a conversation, and then I just want to acknowledge that it may not all conclude, but I welcome thoughts and feedback through one-on-ones or email or the next time that we're gathered together as a team. And so really for this section, it's for you to share insights about what areas are most important to you, and then share perspectives on the strengths and opportunities for improvement here in Portland. So let's start off with budget priorities. It's really a question, and I will ask, and we have some prompts up there that seem to come up in various meetings or in previous years, but really it doesn't have to be on that list for you to share. What areas you think as a board is most important for the district to focus on over the next 3 years?
I was going to say, notice that we didn't have anything specifically that said literacy, and I know that you're doing a big push towards literacy, but I mean, I would personally like to see some focus on like early intervention and early support, early learning, especially around literacy, you know, how to hold a pencil, how to recognize text. And I mean, all of these things are good, right? I mean, student achievement. But I'm concerned about the kids that we miss when they're young, when they're they're kindergarten through, let's say, second grade.
So I'll do a lightning round. Student achievement, classroom instruction, and school leadership. And the school leadership, just because that's so important to the first two. You can't have student achievement or good classroom instruction, I don't think, without a good school leader. The other thing I'll call out, and just because it continually comes up, what's not on here is class size. And I think this is one of those really challenging things that we know class size can affect student achievement. Generally, the studies show it's really large differences, the difference between, say, 32 and 16. You're going to see a difference in student achievement. You're not going to see a difference in student achievement between 32 and 33. It matters so much to the community. And that presents this really challenging moment that ever since I've gotten on the board 6 years ago, you know, with now a couple different superintendents and going to these conferences and realizing that, like, that is not what drives good achievement in a school. What drives good achievement in a school is a good teacher and a good environment and a good school leader. And yet, what will turn out hundreds of parents is if their class sizes go from 32 to 33, or they happen to be in a fourth grade that's got 34 students, they will turn out by the hundreds. And I don't know how we bridge that, because to the extent we as a district respond to that and send all these teachers to those places and, you know, and drop those class sizes from 34 to 17, we will, you know, be taking away resources from somewhere else. And we may not be having that much of an achievement on class size, but we'll make the community happy. Versus how much do we do what educational professionals say is the right thing to do for student achievement, knowing that we're going to make the community mad. So I don't know how you bridge that, but I'm just going to throw that out there. But those are my three: student achievement, classroom instruction, and school leadership.
I kind of want to add to that a little bit, because I think one of the things with class size that we talk about, I mean, it's a very interesting discussion, and we should look at the data. But I'm also curious about if that data also includes like rate of teacher burnout. Because one of the things I know about class size from what I've seen, my personal experience, and what I've heard from a lot of other people is that, you know, teachers, probably a higher percentage than most other groups, have a care for kids, right? And so when I teach in a year that I have like 20 kids, I have a high level standard for myself.
and then suddenly when class size balloons and I'm teaching 30 kids, 40 kids, I still have that same high level expectations for myself, my kids, and the performance, and that just makes me work a lot more, and I'm on burnout lane, right? And so one of the things I just want to be careful of is, like, I know there's some class size data, but if we correlate that, if we cross-section that with, I don't know if that's the right term, with turnover rate, what are we looking at? Because we know that turnover is also a huge institutional cost. And I just want to, so like, I agree that some places class size doesn't make as much difference, but it, because I've worked in locales that the class size ballooned and I could cope, okay? But I've also worked in some place where I could not.
Yeah.
And I think, so I just want to add that.
Yeah, and honestly, I didn't mean that to in any way be a reason for not doing it. I more wanted to actually surface it because maybe we should just do it. Like maybe because of the teacher, satisfaction and burnout rates, and because of the community satisfaction rates, maybe this district should put a whole bunch of resources, take it from some of the specialty programs and other things, and put it into lowering class sizes. And we've talked about this. We could, we asked for this data years ago, the cost estimates, and we could cap class sizes at 28. And it's millions of dollars that gets redirected primarily from underserved schools to more wealthy schools. But like, we could do that, and there are some good reasons to do that. I think if we do it, we should be honest that we're probably not going to see student achievement gains from it, but we might see better teacher retention. We might see better teacher satisfaction. We might see better community satisfaction. We might see trust go up in the schools, and maybe that's a good reason to do it. Even if the student achievement doesn't go up, if our parents and community believe in the district, maybe that will have a positive impact on student achievement indirectly. So there are reasons to do it. I think we should have a really blunt conversation about it. Yeah.
And actually, that's actually where I was assuming you're going, which is why I said to add to that, not to argue against. But yeah. So thank you for adding that. I agree completely. Director Bidmar. Oh, I didn't state my statement. I didn't. Anyway, I'll just say it really quick. Just really quick, I think just student achievement. I would also, school leadership is also important, but I also am a little bit, I guess I don't quite understand, because when I look at this question and planning for worst case scenario, when I look at this question, it's like, are we asking, what are we protecting, right, in future cuts, or are we assuming the best case, and what are we investing in? So I think those are kind of two different questions.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I would say I would encourage, as you continue to answer board, I believe this will fuel future conversations about what are the trade-offs for some of those items that, may cost more, that will require more resources. Sort of the, if not that, then what?
Can we backtrack a little bit? I'd like to add two. I only said the early learning, but would definitely be student achievement, but also hiring and retaining the best staff. And I would say, especially at the principal level, where we know that can, having a stable principal will increase achievement.
Thank you. Director Bidmar.
Yeah, I think this mirrors the survey that went out to the community. I think I sent you an email saying, how come class size isn't on there? Just knowing that the community interest. So my question, I would say, is like, student achievement seems like an outcome. I'm trying to think, what are those budget expenditures that we're saying is going to result in student achievement? Because obviously student achievement may be number one, but like, what does that mean in terms of budget expenditures? Because for me, this may be actually, it's classroom instruction, maybe it's classroom instruction and class size, or, but I'm not sure what that means from a budgetary standpoint, so I'd want to understand better. Is it that we have, push-in supports, or, tiered levels of support for students? So maybe if that's what it is, I would say that. Okay, but I think be more specific about what the budget, what the investment is. And we know that high quality instruction is what makes all the difference. So I would have to be for that, and also school leadership. It's not those other things are important, but if you're just if we're wanting to drive changes in classrooms and for students, those are the ones for academics, I would say.
Great. Director Hollins, and then I'll go to Director Sullivan.
I guess for me, it'd be student achievement, classroom instruction, and CTE, career technical education. Some of the reasons why is that, when you get kids that are interested in things, they tend to want to be in school, get excited about school as well. So I would say student achievement, classroom instruction, and CTE.
Besides the Benson alum?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I work there, so I hear you. Director Sullivan.
I would say hiring, developing, and retaining the best staff, and that should lead to quality classroom instruction and inclusion of all students, and certainly achievement. So I think get the best staff and except maybe for physical facilities, they can't do much about that, but kind of would make everything else work.
And Director Green, if you'd like to finish it off.
I would go with the literacy, the early childhood literacy, the science of reading, the phonics of reading, making sure that all of our kids understand that and that they're in position. By the time they get to the third grade, changing our language from can to will. So that would be my number one. I would then go to hiring, developing, retaining the best staff, making sure that we have the right people in our schools, not just in the schools, but in the right seat. So it may be necessary to move some staff and do some shuffling to make sure that we got the right people on the bus and in the right seat. That's important. I also want to say, I know we haven't hit on it much, but I'm going to say the physical facilities. I want our kids to know that we intentionally are creating spaces where they can learn. It's hard to learn when, you got rat poop in places and holes in the ceiling and stuff like that. So improving those physical facilities so they actually want to be in our buildings, that they want to be in those spaces, and that they feel they can learn. So if I had to limit it to 3, I think that's where I would go.
Excellent. I appreciate that. And so this next one is a lightning round. So you get one positive aspect of, this is thinking of strengths and opportunities. You get one positive aspect of Portland Public Schools and one thing you would change about the district. So, anyway.
I can go first. A positive aspect is we have people that are dedicated. We have we have people that want to be here. They're mission motivated. One thing I could change about the district is having more of an ability to not replicate the way we've done things, and to be open to really being innovative in our approaches to everything from the budget to teaching kids how to read.
I guess I can go. The most positive aspect for me in the district is our kids. Our kids is what makes me get up. Our kids is what makes me want to continue. Kids is what makes me want to keep doing what I'm doing. I think one thing I probably would change, oh God, I just have one. I'm going to just stick with the positive.
Okay. Single most positive, it's not just because I'm sitting next to you, but I'm going to say Superintendent Armstrong, as I'm really excited about your just energy and passion, and as we talked about, taking advantage of this honeymoon period. We could make it last 2-3 years. We can make it last. And there's one thing I could change about the district. I'm going to say our toxic relationship with the community. And I'm going to stop there because I got a lot of views on why it's toxic, but that's not important. It doesn't really matter what caused it, how it happened, who was at fault. It exists, and it's got to be fixed one way or the other.
Director Sullivan?
Okay, I think the most positive thing is that I see throughout the district people really caring about each other and certainly about educating our kids. The change, I would say, it feels like we're not very flexible when a need comes up. That with staffing, we seem kind of stuck sometimes. And I think Jay Bruno said we're not very nimble when we need to make adjustments for our kids. And I think that probably is something that just takes more money and more people, but with what we have, I don't think we're as nimble as we could be either. And that's it.
Thank you. I guess I'll go really quick. I think one of the huge positives of this district is just the care and diversity of everyone. I mean, I'm talking about students, the teachers, some of the nicest kids I've ever worked with, some of the greatest teachers that are just brilliant and really creative and really hardworking and really passionate about their work, and the kids that are really passionate about just, so many things. I think one thing I can change, it's actually kind of a positive, because I think Superintendent Armstrong has really hit this head on, is that in the past, I think there's been a feeling that there's people weren't feeling, schools and staff weren't feeling supported in this district. And I think Superintendent Armstrong, you've been kind of really attacking this head on and changing course on that. So I think that is kind of a positive. So, but it's a lot of work, no pressure.
Should I go? Or?
I forgot who always.
Okay, so one positive thing is just our students and our families. I think they're amazing. And then one thing to change, that we can't support all our students achieving at high levels.
Director Green, you're still with us?
Yes, I am.
Because we can't see you.
Yeah, that's intentional. So the thing that I love about our district are the people. I love the people that are coming to this work. I love the students that show up in spite and despite of us sometimes. I love that they continue, that they continue to challenge us to think differently. So I love the people. Relationship is king in my world. The thing that I would change so that I don't beat on a drum and I can make sure that I'm adding maybe different is that we would be proactive instead of reactive. That we would get in front of the problem and address it versus responding to the problem. And I would say that across the board in everything that we do. When it comes to communication, that we would be proactive instead of reactive. When it comes to looking at the needs of our kids, that we would be proactive instead of reactive. That we make the initiative and we be transparent with the community around it, and then we show them this is what we're doing and this is why, and that we wouldn't respond to issues. That we would constantly stay in front of the issue and be communicating that with our families and community and with our staff, so that everyone understands and is on the same page around what it is we're doing, what they can expect, and who they can contact if they got questions, concerns, or irritations.
Thank you. So that was excellent. Everyone had a chance to go? Did you go, Michelle? Yeah. Okay. Great. So yes, that was macro. We will have a few other engagements where we're going to go a little bit deeper and talk, because as you all know, our budget needs to reflect the priorities of the board, and we're going to engage and lean into that process over the next several months. So we have just a couple more slides. We're going to go really quickly so that we can wrap this up in 2 minutes and 2 seconds at least. Thank you.
Good evening, or should I say good night. Ha ha ha. Deborah Kafori, Chief of Staff. I'm not going to read this page. You already voted on your 2025 legislative session advocacy, but for the 20 people out there, including my husband, hi honey, who's watching us right now, here is our legislative agenda as a reminder. So we're going to be working very hard on all of these pieces because they all manage to influence our budget in a very, very direct way. All right, next slide, please. And then along with the legislative advocacy, going hand in hand with our budget advocacy, is our engagement opportunities. We believe strongly that one of the ways that we're going to achieve Dr. Armstrong's one of her priorities of building trust and relationships, and get at Director Scott's issue around building trust and relationships with our community, is by doing a lot of engagement opportunities. So we've already done a community survey, which Director Brim Edwards mentioned earlier. We will have results from that. We'll discuss those at the plan right now is due at the March 4th board meeting. We have started principal engagement. We have heard in the past that possibly one of the most important people to influence the change in our children's lives are the principals, and they haven't felt as engaged in the budget process in the past. So we started with them early and often, and Dr. Franco has been leading up those engagement opportunities for principals. We're doing focus groups, which is, I don't know if it's a new thing. I haven't seen it yet, so that's coming up in the future. And then educator town halls, not just reaching the principals, but the people who are teaching our kids to ensure that their voice is being heard. And then one thing that is not up there but is also very important is doing some community forums. And we're actually tying them together with our legislative advocacy meetings, because trying to get people sometimes out for a budget forum when there's not really the budget to talk about is a little challenging. But if we tie it to our legislative advocacy work, that's, we think, is going to be very fruitful. There's already been a few scheduled. Superintendent Armstrong and Director Wang are going to Southeast Portland, Dunaway Elementary Schools, spearheading one on February 10th. And we're in contact with several other schools and wanting to hit every quadrant. I guess there's more, there's 5 now. So I'm not going to go there. Then it was 6, that's right, South Portland. So there's trying to hit every area of our town, possibly even every cluster, to ensure that parents are able to come, community members, to talk about their views on the budget, and then we will inspire them to go to Salem and lobby their legislators. That's right. And actually, I would love any of your insight and feedback into ways that you think we could improve our community engagement. Thank you. Last slide. Thank you. Perfect.
All right. I just want to say one thing. I wrote something for Mayon, and so I just want to just let them know. I just want to take a moment to express my heartfelt gratitude and deep appreciation for you. Your dedication, expertise, and steady leadership has been invaluable to this organization, and I want to make sure that I give you your flowers now. In times of both opportunities and challenges, your ability to guide us with insight, integrity, strategic focus has ensured our continued growth and stability. We are truly fortunate to have someone as talented and as committed as you helping us navigate our path forward. Thank you for not only staying with us, but for inspiring me. I know you had all kinds of stuff to do. You're ready to retire, and the fact that you stayed anyway inspired me to really put priorities in first, which is our kids. And so I just want to say thank you, and also thank you for giving me the push when we was at Innovative Studios, and you pushed me to go and do that impromptu skit. But I just wanted to say, thank you so much for everything you've done.
Thank you so much, Director Hollins. I really appreciate those words, and that was a memorable day for me too, because you gave me a push to stick around on that occasion and other occasions. So thank you very much. If I can just add one appreciation on my part, which is to the staff of the finance division. They were and remain a huge part of why I or anybody that was in my situation was able to be effective or try as well as I could to be effective, it just wouldn't have been possible or wise to attempt to do so without the awesome work and the awesome people in the finance division. So, point of personal privilege, since there was a little moment, I just wanted to thank everybody there.
Thank you for sharing. That was awesome. But I have to note that we forgot to bring the cake. There's no cake. So, okay, good. Because then otherwise, the vice chair and I will have to figure out some manufactured crisis to force you back in February so we can get you cake.
I thought you were going to sign me up to bake something.
All right. Thank you, Chiefs Lee and Kafuri. I really appreciate it, and I don't want to adjourn this because otherwise you have to go. So we're going to stay for another 2 hours. Well, okay, I guess I should. All right, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.